6 o'clock this evening. How do I know?
I now call the Snoqualmie City Council meeting to order. All please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Shepherd, can you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk, can you please take the roll call?
Councilmember Jeans.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway has requested to be excused. Councilmember Mayhew.
Here.
Councilmember Lassay.
Here.
Councilmember Sundwall.
Here.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Here.
Mayor Larson.
I am here. May I have a motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Holloway?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Holloway. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for tonight.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented. Any questions? Councilmember Shepherd?
I would like to take the warrants off.
Okay. Any other discussion, council, or suggestions? All right, with that, all those in favor?
Mr. Mayor?
Oops, Councilmember Lassay.
We received an email earlier today with an appointment. I don't see it on the agenda.
Oh, yes, thank you. I appreciate you pointing that out to add that. Yeah, I plan to appoint Chelsea Rivas to the Snoqualmie Parks and Events Committee tonight, so.
I think we need that added under the public
Yeah.
hearings, presentations, and proclamations.
Yes, sir, thank you. We'll
Wait,
add that. Are all in favor of adding that to the agenda?
Yeah.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay. Any other items, council? All right, with that, all going back to the original motion now, approving with the amendments as stated. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, motion is carried. So at this time, then, we will move on to public hearings presentations. At this time, I'd like to appoint Chelsea Rivas to the Snoqualmie Parks and Events Commission to position 5 for a term ending February 28, 2020. May I have a confirmation, council? Or motion a second?
What does that mean?
Can I have a motion a second to
So moved.
confirm?
Or second, whatever I'm supposed to say.
Second.
I need someone to move to confirm.
I move.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Shepherd, I didn't hear. So we have a motion and a second to confirm Chelsea Rivas to the spec. Any discussion? Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this potential appointment part of action? Seeing no one move forward, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. All right, with that, we will move on to citizens' comments. At this time, we will provide time for citizens to comment on items not on the agenda. But first, a few ground rules. One, Snoqualmie citizens, or the 13,500 that didn't have a chance to come here tonight, probably watching the Seahawks game, have a right to have their elected representatives perform their duties on behalf of the city in an efficient and orderly manner. Therefore, comments will be limited to 3 minutes each. Second, please wait to be recognized. Come to the podium and state your name and address for the record. 3, direct your comments to the council as a whole and not to individual members. 4, please note that this is not a time to ask questions of the council, mayor, or staff, or to engage in debate. The council will simply and quietly, respectfully listen to your concerns. And last, please respect the decorum of these proceedings, as all due respect will be afforded to you. So at this time, would anyone like to speak from the public? Wayne.
My name's Wayne Russell, 8438 Meadowbrook Way Southeast. Anyhow, one of my big concerns right now, you folks, well, first of all, I got to thank you all. You're working on the budget, so I know you all been pretty diligent. But anyhow, one big concern I have concerning this is going to be down the road in a matter of the next few years, is doing some research. I found out some information about the bridge you've heard me talk about going across the river before, from the parkway across, and my understanding is this bridge is going to run roughly around $200 million to make. And I'm really concerned who's going to be paying for this as you folks figure out your next budgets and who you're going to tax to do this. And I'm just wondering how many of my fellow citizens up on the parkway are aware of this and what kind of traffic this is going to cause on the parkway, since traffic is one of our big issues here. And I've also seen now that North Bend is complaining about the same thing that we are. So really, basically, I'm trying to figure out the part of Snoqualmie that is annexed, that's across the river, who is going to be paying for this? Is the Salish expansion going to take this into consideration?
Wayne, can you clarify what bridge you're talking about? I think we're all
There's no, it's not, hasn't been built yet. It's proposed to be built by 2020, which is only a year away.
Proposed by who? And what bridge? What bridge?
Right now, I'm not going to divulge that information, but I do have documented writing of the bridge, and you're on it, Mr. Mayor, and it was discussed before. And I believe in 2014.
I think I heard
I'm not mentioning the names because I know that breaks the quasi judicial process. So anyhow,
Are you talking about the parkway extending across?
I'm talking about a bridge going across the Snoqualmie River.
Debate
Yes,
back and
sir.
forth, so I'm
I'm
talking-
sorry, I was trying to
Public
ask for
comment,
clarifying.
but this is public comment period, doesn't
Okay.
matter.
Yes, thank you.
Point well taken. Continue, Maureen.
So anyhow, that's my big concern, who's going to and what people are aware of it. Because as stuff gets built across the river, that is going to be the main source of traffic, and it's going to go over the parkway. People aren't going to go down the Reinig Road or 202 to get to I-90. So anyhow, that is my big concern when this proposal comes in, is who is going to pay for it other than the citizens. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Wayne. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to an item that is not on the agenda? Monica?
Good evening, Monica Lowney, P.O. Box 493. I actually came tonight because I wanted to thank all of you for the town hall meeting last week. I thought it was very effective. Clearly, we have a lot of concerns in our community, and I'm sure you all saw that by the amount of residents that showed up and expressed concerns. I would like to urge you to continue having those. I would hope you would have them quarterly. But the main reason why I came tonight, which I was not planning to do, was for Carol Peterson's statement. As a matter of fact, she doesn't even know I'm going to say this, but I wanted to talk to you tonight about the homeless because I believe it's a very big problem in our community. And I know that I personally have talked about it a couple times before regarding the little green building we have here that sits vacant most of the time in the parking lot. I know the council approved it was either 30 or 50,000 sometime earlier this year to hire a consulting firm to look at the possible updating. The building has dry rot and some other issues, and make suggestions to the city on what would need to be done. And the city was considering possibly selling the building, which I would again like to urge you not to do. I believe we need to use that for community purposes as well as maybe a possible senior center. But I want to go back to Carol because what she said really touched me, and it was about people who are in need of shelter right now. And it'd be nice if we could possibly open this building up in the near future because we have a homeless shelter across the street at the Methodist Church that will only be going until the end of next month, I believe. And then those homeless people will be moving to Fall City. So right now, you know, they're basically cast out into the cold by 7:30 in the morning. They're not allowed to go back until 7:30 in the evening. And although they appreciate the shelter, they are very cold during the day. I actually met a gal while setting up the nativity in front of the church whose shoes were falling apart and her feet were exposed to the cold. So as a citizen, I'd just like to know why we're not utilizing this building to help people that are in the community that need help today, because this is very real. And I'd also like to leave it with this holiday, which I'm sure we're all going to have a wonderful holiday with our families, sitting by the warm fire and eating delicious food. I want you to think of these people that will be cast out to the cold. And I hope that you'll soon get together with Carol and come to some kind of compromise that could benefit these people. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Is there anyone else like to speak to an item not on the agenda? Julie?
Julie Lake, box 1748. I just have a minor point, although I don't hear much about sustainable cities or sustainability here. I know we inadvertently got solar panels on the city hall because they wouldn't work on the Y, but it always kind of bugs me that you're all drinking out of plastic bottles with purchased water. And so it occurred to me, we have safe, clean city water, and there must be a tap in the back, and maybe someone could donate a pitcher and some drinking glasses. It just really, it seems counterintuitive to have all these plastic bottles and all this purchased water going. And maybe, you know, we could think about other ways to make our city sustainable. For instance, Boulder, Colorado's goal is to be carbon neutral. And I just don't hear that much about that here. So the first step could possibly be the plastic water bottles. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. Anybody else like to speak at this time? All right, thank you. With that, we move on to the consent agenda. All items listed below will be acted by one motion. Action items include minutes for the December 4th, 2018 special workshop meeting, or regular council meeting, excuse me. And other approvals include Agenda Bill 18154, cancellation of the council committee meetings regularly scheduled for December 17th and 18th, 2018, and the cancellation of the December 24th, 2018 council meeting. Do we have a motion, council?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 18154 as stated. Any discussion, council? Councilmember Mayhew.
Sorry, I just wasn't listening closely. Are we also approving the minutes for December 4th?
Oh, did I skip that? Oh, no, I stated that.
Yeah, okay,
Yes,
so it's the minutes of December 4th and the AB 18154?
correct.
Thank you.
Any further discussion, council? Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on these items part action? Seeing no one move forward, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on to ordinances, Agenda Bill 18143, ordinance adopting the 2019 and 2020 biennium budget. This was introduced on the 13th and is ready for action tonight. I believe the summary statement was already read in, so that we could just read in the motion, please.
Chair's not here, so, yeah.
Move to adopt ordinance number
Sorry, 1210.
adopting the 2019-2020 biennial budget. Sir, may I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 18143 as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. All right, so what we'll do, actually, before we begin, I'll go ahead and open it as our protocol to any public comment. Is there any public comment on this ordinance prior to council discussion and action? Carol.
Well, you've heard me before, you know that the shelter is just extremely important to me. Our Human Services Committee, as you probably know, put food and shelter at the top of the list at 40% of whatever budget you agree to. And I understand the budget right now, it's a little bit more than what we asked for and the amount that was asked for with the group. But the only thing I want to say is the extra that would be past the 195,000, instead of putting it to the two things, and I think Sean spoke to this, that we didn't fund, like the North Bend Community Church and whatever, I really would like to put that 30,000 or whatever to the shelter. Because with that, we can open that day center Monday through Friday until 5 o'clock. And that, right now, they're Monday, Thursday, and Friday. And with the budget we've already agreed to, Ann and Sarah and I and the staff people, will make it one more day. But if we could do one more day, we'd have it 5 days a week. And that, to me, is so much more important than putting it on, I don't know. The two things, we didn't rule them out, but we ruled them not as important. So I just would love to see that extra money go to the shelter and keep that day center over. That's not the handout, that's the hand up. That's the one that helps people get housing, get jobs, and we're bringing in professionals to do that instead of just putting them in a shelter for the night. And that's the key to the whole thing, as I'm sure all of you know. So that's what I'd love to see happen. Thank you.
Impeccable timing. Thank you, Carol. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to this ordinance at this time? All right, seeing no one else move forward. I'm going to turn it over to Robert for a quick kind of review or summary since our last budget conversation. And Robert's asked that he be allowed to just get through the presentation. So please write down whatever questions or concerns you might have, and then we'll take those up at the end of the
Is it appropriate now to ask a question that's not related to his presentation?
Sure.
So this is based on a resident comment that was just made. And maybe I understood it incorrectly. So on that extra, was it, Jim, 30, 35, 34,000, something like that?
Turned out to be around 30.
30? Didn't we agree not to fund the zero items at all? We kept them at zero, right?
That's correct.
And all we did was take that extra money to fund the max of those who got anything at all.
That's correct.
Right? And so I was, okay. I misunderstood that comment, so just want to make sure.
I would suggest, is there any concerns about that? Perhaps a remedy would be to say, just allocate that 30, or that extra monies that was approved by the council. Don't appoint it anywhere right now, just send it back to the Human Services Committee for the recommendation on that balance.
I mean, then the intent was to use
Councilmember
that.
Mayhew, Councilmember Mayhew, and then Councilmember Lissay.
You go first on
Nope.
changing this? Okay. I think there's still a few things for us to discuss on the budget, and we've had so many staff presentations on the budget. I'd really like to see us not do another staff presentation on the budget, or if we're going to do one, limit it to 3 minutes or a relatively short period of time, so they don't lose this meeting to more staff presentation.
Councilmember Lissay and then Councilmember
Yeah,
Sumner.
as it pertained to the Human Services, my understanding was that it wasn't a matter of allocating it to items, it was just a matter of appointing it to what the full request from the Human Services Committee.
Right.
We weren't giving it to new groups, we were just making sure that the Human Services Committee's recommendation was fully funded.
Or the requests were fully funded, yeah.
Right, the request was fully funded. If we want to not necessarily earmark it, I'm more than happy to have that committee work with that amount of money and figure out where the best place to put it is. I
You wanna
think
make a quick-
that's
you
the
wanna make a
purpose of a
quick-
budget in my mind.
If someone wants to make a quick motion so we don't get bogged down in that discussion. All right, Councilmember Sunwell.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So, in principle, I'm in favor of what Councilmember Mayhew was talking about. The only question I had was, I sort of jokingly walked in here and talked to these guys about, let's get this voted on at 7:15 and be done. And the retort was, well, we don't even know what the budget is. So, both of those were generalizations. But I think the point they were making is we gave some feedback, and I think in principle, we came up with a balanced budget. So I just want to make sure that we see that they did that, whether that's in 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 5 minutes. And
That's what you're
then,
thinking.
but I'm with you. We need 95% of this meeting needs to be about deliberation, not about more PowerPoints.
All I wanted to do was show the changes. That's it.
Great.
All right, if there's no further discussion, then we'll kick it to Robert.
Again, these are the changes since prior meetings, so I just want to make sure we get this correct. We moved the streets division expenditures of approximately $1.2 million annually to the general fund. We had annual programmatic transfers from the streets revenue fund to the general fund include $260,000 for solid waste fees, $312,000 for gas tax, $150,000 for retransfer for capital maintenance of streets. All of this to support the streets maintenance activities. We have a set-aside fund balance of streets of $1.06 million for future council action and discussion. It is not appropriated at this time. We eliminated the general fund expenditure contingency in 2019 with the goal of balancing the budget. Amount in 20 equals about $105,000. Increased human services expenditure of $30,000 in 2019, $37,000 in 20. Department adjustments, this is something that we made one final pass to make sure we got everything we need for this budget. There was an administrative study including the employee satisfaction survey. It was budgeted in 18, but it was not executed or expended. So we're rebudgeting it in 19 because we don't do carryover budgets here. Finance department decided we need a $1,000 annual increase for travel and training because for our annual conference that we send about 5 to 6 staff members on average, the room block had sold out within 5 minutes of the conference, so our hotel costs are increasing. We want to make sure that we have enough funding to send our staff to that conference. That's the only changes we made. And I just wanted to clarify for the entire council really fast just on what it means with the contingency elimination. So the general fund cannot go over budget without an appropriation subject to supermajority approval by council during the year. Departments will need to go to council if unanticipated expenses went over the appropriated general fund amount each year. And again, we note that unexpended appropriations for 19 do not carry over into 2020. So even though we have a biennial budget, we do have to rebudget each year. In current language of the ordinance, if individual departments went over budget, an appropriation would be needed to transfer expenditure authority from one department or another, meaning like police to administration or police to fire. So if there's any questions on that, I'll entertain them at this time. So that's the change from previous budgets.
Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Lissay.
So can you go back to the slide where you were talking about the $40,000? So I wasn't clear what it was for.
That's for the Administrative Services Department. A bulk of that was for an employee satisfaction survey that was already approved by council this year. It just wasn't done this year.
So that's 20,000 that wasn't spent on something else that had been approved?
Yeah, it was more than that, but that's correct. Yes.
Just rolling the money forward.
And so it's just for, is 40,000 now for an employee satisfaction survey?
I think it was a bit under that amount, but we also had, I believe, another survey that could possibly come up in the next year. So we just wanted to make sure they had enough money in professional services to cover their activities.
But now it's 40,000, it used to be 20,000?
Well, again, we want to make sure they have enough to cover since there's no contingency. And there's a couple other, Deborah.
Can we get any more detail to that, other than?
So the employee climate survey is 20-some thousand. Without looking at it, I can't give you the exact amount. But that is what we asked, that since that did not occur in 2018, that we still be able to do that in 2019. There was an extra amount included in case other surveys come up, like in 2018, we did not have the compensation study budgeted for that, but we were requested at the end of last year to have one. So it's just money to have in case something like that comes up again. We're not saying it's going to be another, we're not even saying it's going to be another survey within the administration portion of the division, but it could be, say, in finance or one of the other departments that's budgeted within that whole administration department.
So we spent, was it $29,000 on the current administrative portion of the salary survey, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And there's, AWC has a free salary survey available to us.
They do.
Is there any way that we can utilize the free salary survey instead of spending $29,000 on it?
We have done that before, but not for a comprehensive study.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
I believe it was Councilmember Lasay, then Mayhew, and then Sunwell.
On this next page, you had a comment there, unexpended appropriations from 2019 to do not carry in 2020. What does that mean?
It just means some agencies give authority in their ordinances to say you didn't spend 20,000 this year, like on the surveying, and that authority would automatically roll over year to year. We don't do that here. So each year we're budgeting a new budget.
But as a council, we have the authority to do that at the end of 2019 if we so choose. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I believe it would take a
Supermajority.
Well, I was just going to say that this is a biennial budget, so unless the ordinance provides that they don't roll over, the amounts appropriated are for the biennium. So
I understand that, but we're just got finished discussing an item that was in 2018 that we magically rolled it over by reappropriating funds. It's the same thing.
You can state that.
Right? Isn't it pretty much the same thing?
So at the end of the biennium, certain categories of, and I know Councilmember Mayhew is ready to weigh in on this also, certain categories of things don't roll over, certain particular capital for programs that have already been approved do roll over. And so this is an item, the employee climate survey is one that wouldn't typically, in that category in the general fund, wouldn't typically roll over absent some action here, since it hasn't been part of a contract that's already been approved. The money was approved, but the contract for that survey was not yet approved.
Councilmember Mayhew.
If I could ask the city attorney, if you would draw your attention to bullet 3 on the screen. I take it you do not agree with bullet 3.
I mean, not unless the council could so provide in the ordinance. I don't believe that we do in this ordinance.
I don't believe that we do either. So to be clear, bullet number 3 on the screen is actually not true.
It's not as accurate as it could be.
Okay, so I'm trying to help my fellow council members understand they don't need to be concerned about this item, that in fact we have a biennial budget here. That would be reasonable for them to conclude.
It is a biennial budget, and typically, the statute also authorizes the expenditure of the carry-forward balance, absent some limitation in the ordinance otherwise. There are places here where you're not appropriating the beginning fund balance, but those beginning fund balances going from year 1 to year 2 in the biennial budget would be authorized unless you say otherwise.
So the thing I actually wanted to talk about, I just want to make sure that we're clear on bullet number 3, because I think there was some concern about it, which there didn't need to be. But the thing I actually wanted to say is that I think coming at this 11th hour with department adjustments, there are many, many, many items across the 2018 budget that didn't get spent and that don't roll over and that have to get covered out of new items. There's not one, there's many, many, many of them. So I think changing the administrative department budget is, as proposed, is almost $4.1 million. I think at the 11th hour to add $41,000 is, I don't think we should do it. I think we should go with the numbers that we agreed to at our last meeting and stick to that.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So my comments are similar. We walked out last week with what I would call a balanced budget, appropriating the correct revenues with the correct expenses. And so if you guys want to add 41 to the budget, my question would be, where's the 41, where are you taking it out? Where's the 41 that you're going to steal from somewhere? Not steal, that's terrible. That you're going to reallocate to cover this 41?
So I would say that there's some options, for example, that we have. For example, if you choose not to appropriate the $41,000, we can incorporate that back into the expenditure contingency that we planned.
So right now we're balanced with it in there.
Right. So he hasn't had an opportunity to go on to his charts, his next 2 charts. I think it'd be beneficial for us to get to that stage if we can.
Fair enough.
All right, continue, Robin.
So again, we balance, I'm not going to go into the detail again. We're still reflecting a balanced budget. You can see for the first year, we have revenues over expenditures slightly. Second year, we're balanced. Third year, or sorry, in 18, the 19 we're balanced. 20 we're balanced. So we're presenting a balanced budget to council with that 40,000 in there. And again, I do want to remind council, we did reduce, we took 427,000 out of the contingency last week. We're just looking to restore 40,000, which is essentially money that would have been spent this year anyway. So it's money that is quote unquote savings this year that would have been spent on this study.
Great. I have a question.
Councilmember Ross, sorry.
So from the budget workshop, we were positive in 21 and 22. So why are expenses higher than?
Because we added streets per council request. Because we're adding streets, we added the streets budget back into here. So last week we did not have streets
In
this chart, but now we have we moved streets to general fund per the council request. We moved the streets maintenance budget into the general fund. That's the biggest difference. That's the biggest change you're seeing. It's about 1.2 million a year.
Right, for 19 and 20, and it
Correct.
balanced. And so for 21 and 22, what happened there?
Actually, what you're seeing there is streets. So you're seeing the demand for streets when you get into those out years, and that's where we talk about what do we do with streets in those out years, and that's what you're seeing on 21 and 22, is not increasing or using fund balance in streets, not increasing anything. If all things were constant, and everything we're doing right now for the next 2 years held constant, that's what you would see in 21 and 22, streets included.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So you might have answered this question, but I just want to be clear. Last week's slide, when we left here with large agreement on a balanced budget, total revenues for 2019 was 18.16 and expenses were 18.13. So there was is that a $30,000 gap or a $300,000? That's a $30,000 gap. Now they're 18.8 and 18.8. Why did they both go up? Streets?
Streets, and then we reduced the expenditures on the other side. So when we reduced contingencies, we also we split the housing money that we were going to do, the 200,000. We split that between 2 years. So those changes that we made.
But if the difference is 30,000, So we had a surplus of $30,000 when we walked out of the room last week.
But we weren't showing streets in that. So again, when we add streets, this is what you come up with. That's the difference. So we add streets, we made reductions last week to accommodate the streets in there to balance with streets in it. So that's the difference. We took a different mindset. So instead of just having parks, community development, operations in there, pulling out the capital, we were told by council to consolidate streets into the general fund, which we've done on this, and to balance based on that. So because of that, we made certain changes based on the council's recommendations last week.
And
to
the added
balance
41 is in this 18.88?
It is.
Okay.
And we took it out of a potential
So
contingency.
you're telling me literally the difference between 18.16 and 18.88, which is 6.62, so 620,000 is streets
Yes.
to the penny?
That's correct. Well, again, we reduced other items, but yes, that's adding streets in there because you're adding 1.2 million in streets in there for expenditures, but you reduced 425,000 expenditures for the contingency. You also reduced 80,000 in expenditures for that housing item the first year for 19.
Councilmember Lasay.
I'll just say you've got me thoroughly confused. On slide number 3, doesn't it say there's set aside fund balance in streets for future council action and discussion?
Right, because we're not using fund balance per the council's direction last week. So we've taken out all the fund balance.
What are
We're
we
just
using?
using active revenues coming in. So this budget is balanced based on just active revenues coming in, not dipping into fund balance for streets. That's the difference. Because before we were using some unexpended fund balance from previous years. We had an accumulated fund balance in one fund of $730,000. We're not using that at this point. We're setting it aside for council action later based on the council's desire last week, or at least what we were told.
Councilmember Mayhew.
What is this notion of set aside? There's no set aside anywhere in this budget ordinance. We're just merely, as with many other fund balances, not appropriating it. What is this set aside?
So if it's not shown, it's not included in the total expenditures, it's not appropriated.
And so not appropriated equals set aside?
It's not, it's not an, back to
We
the
have many
earlier
fund
comment.
balances here that
Right.
aren't appropriated. Are they all set aside?
They're not authorized for expenditure if they're not included in the total shown for expenditures, because that's what the statute defines as constituting the city's appropriations for the biennium.
Right. So I'm just trying to figure out this set aside wording, what the heck it means.
That's something I've always used, so I apologize. You don't like it.
Or just give a definition to it, Robert.
No, I just think it's
Fund
causing
balance.
some
I
confusion.
didn't have to say set aside. I could just say
That's the point.
Fund
he's-
balance that's not authorized for expenditure.
That's the point he's making, is just that there's a fund balance in the streets fund that we have not determined at this point what to do with, which is consistent with the idea that we're going to decide that in January and February, what to do with fund balances. So that's all he's trying to point out to us. Although perhaps were you also trying to point out that we had not appropriated any of it, and therefore if we wish to spend it at that time, we'll need to do a supermajority? Were you trying to point that out?
I wasn't. That would be for that particular source, but we have other sources that are appropriated, and I'm going to
Yeah,
show you.
so you were just trying to point out that that's
Yeah,
a million that's
We're not
there
using, yes.
in fund balance. Okay.
All right, continue, Robert, please.
Okay, I'm just going to jump really fast to, we talked about appropriating the capital funds because that just came up, so I just want to show you this chart really fast. And again, this is what is appropriated in there. You don't have to, again, the council will come back per the ordinance, prioritize what they're going to spend, and vote on each item that's in these categories. This is just appropriation for now, to give the authority to do so coming back.
Robert, you want to jump back just one slide? I just wanted to make sure that.
Just before, can I just make a point about that, just to make sure that.
Councilmember Stonewall. Councilmember Mayhew.
Sorry, that's.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Couldn't have been worse than that, I apologize.
So I think the point that Finance Director is making is that what he's trying to do with this slide is he went and summed up for us all of the capital fund appropriations, non-utility, capital fund appropriations that are across in various places. And he's letting us know that if we pass this budget ordinance as it's proposed, within that is about 2.4 million of appropriated capital expenditures. Now, the way the appropriation's written is they can't spend any of that unless it's in a council-approved utility CIP. So we still have control over how that 2.4 million gets spent, which is what we'll be re-looking at that CIP in January, February. But there's 2.4 million approved to be spent, subject to our approving it in the CIP to specific projects. Is that correct, Finance Director?
Absolutely.
And it does not require a supermajority, right?
No.
Right.
Right, and so anything beyond 2.4 would.
But, right, okay.
And so that's what he's trying to make sure we're realizing what those amounts are.
All right, continue, Robert, please. Okay.
Mayor, if I could just have him make a note on slide 9, I think it was inadvertent, but the government type should be expenditures on slide 9, not revenues, just so nobody's confused by that.
Oh, oops, yeah, good catch.
Subheading lists it out there. So.
Sorry about that.
Just a presentation, it's no big deal. I'll make sure we get this correct.
Yeah, we should have caught that. I apologize. And again, everybody has a printout of this, and I think they have the email as well. So I won't go over it unless there's any questions.
Go ahead, Robert, keep moving.
No, nothing else unless anybody has more questions on that.
Any other questions, council?
They're just updated tables from last time. That include the streets revenues on this page, the revenues page, and ignore the top on expenditures, streets operations and maintenance. You can see, and then also the change in human services fund we highlighted below there to increase that appropriated amount for 19 and 20.
All right, any other questions on the presentation, or are you ready for any remaining deliberations, council? Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, so I just want to focus in on this. Am I right that if I take the two items that are proposed to be added since the last meeting, it's 41,000, is that correct? So I'm just trying to figure out how that 41,000 translates into these two slides, and I think it only translates into this slide, is that correct?
That is correct.
The color the purple one that's on the screen. Purple, whatever, pink, whatever that
The
is.
expenses slide.
Yeah, so it would show up under the administrative departments that you see there.
Right, so would it be correct for us to believe that when we left the meeting last time, when we had talked about changing some numbers and moving some numbers, that had you done just that, that the total proposed 2019 expenditures would have been 41,000 less than 18,879,956.
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay, so by the time, when you went through and moved the things that we had talked about, what you ended up with, I'm going to use the word surplus to mean revenues and expenditures excluding fund balance transfers. So revenues were greater than expenditures by about 41,000, since they now exactly equal here. And so then 41,000 that you're speaking of is covered by the fact that we actually had an excess of revenues over expenditures of 41,000.
We didn't spend that last year. We didn't have the survey.
Actually, I don't think it has anything to do with last year. It has to do with the fact that revenues in 19 would be higher than the expenditures in 19. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And, okay, thanks.
Councilmember Sunwell.
But back to our first thingy, that the old numbers, it was 18.16 and 18.13. That's 30,000. That was the delta. So where's the 11 coming from?
So I'm prepared to run upstairs right now and print out my reconciliation, if that's going to benefit council at this stage right now, so that I can explain exactly what we did Friday last week to make sure this entire thing balanced out the way it is.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
I mean, but it's.
I guess I
based on the
echo the
comments.
frustration that I fully expected that there were going to be no changes other than what we had asked be done. Like, we actually might be done if there hadn't been these 12th hour things. I mean, if we had another week to do this, another week would probably find other things to spend and save. At some point, we just have to stop. And the 41,000, fine. If it equals out and we have the revenue to cover it, fine. I just don't know why we can't have a meeting where, like, new stuff doesn't come up. So
we wanted to make sure, because we didn't have the contingency, that the departments needed what they needed to operate. And if not, it was like, speak now or forever hold your peace.
this is meeting 11.
Correct.
If the departments haven't spoken up by now, they shouldn't be departments.
Well, we were operating under the assumption until the end of last meeting that we were going to have a contingency to work with just in case unanticipated expenses came up, not just for departments, for the city council. Because that was taken out, I had to go one last pass to make sure if there was an issue to deal with it now. And that was the responsible thing to do as far as that recommendation. Again, it's up to council whether or not to accept that. You don't have to, of course.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So I think that there's never going to be an end to the adjustments to the budget. I think it's always going to be there. I guess I was hoping for a lot more detail than what we've gotten before now. And anyway, I'm just curious how this $40,000, you say we're going to have some money we don't have a contingency fund. We don't have extra money, but we have money, and it just seems like it comes out of nowhere, or it's just another bucket that I didn't know we had.
If
right there in the revenues.
If it's not
Just
money
refer right back.
spent this year that was budgeted for this year, then it's surplus. And it's allocated to a sort of one-time initiative, an employee survey and so forth. Well, I'll let Bob speak to it, but.
I would prefer, Mayor, if it's council's prerogative, that would remove the 41,000.
We'll just remove it.
We
I
will
mean,
do it. Just
we're-
give us some signal, and we'll take it out.
Frankly, trying to make council's life easier, but if you
Well,
want to revisit everything, we'll do
Is
that.
there any other surplus revenue that we're not aware of?
Well, there was those sidewalks that Phil was coming before you to try and do the sidewalks and the trees up by Stellar, and Councilmember Mayhew made a motion to make sure that got rolled over, and now I'm not entirely sure if that money's going over or not, but, I mean, as he said, there's a multitude of examples. You know, we spent the better part of this last year spending all our retreats and stuff working on trying to be more cohesive as a team or a council and working with the administration on Robert's Rules of Orders and rules of engagement and all that. We didn't spend all the time, which we need to do this next year, investing on come up with a common vocabulary and approach to budgets and all that. So we're reinventing a lot on the fly there. I mean, I'm just looking at observation that there's a lot of miscommunication. The frustration that Councilmember Sunwall is expressing is shared equally on both sides of this branches of government, because it's been move fast and sort of breaking things and reinventing things. So if we want to make it simple, but I think what the finance director is just trying to tell you is it's going to make your life a little more, it's just going to slow things down by a lot of nitnoid things are going to have to come back in multitudes for corrections that would be to your desire. But we're fine if you want to do it later. And then we're not going to, and I don't want us getting hung up for one more minute, frankly, on this $40,000. I'd like us to move on. Councilmember Sunwell.
I move to remove the $41,000 from the proposal.
Second.
Motion and second to remove the $41,000. Any further discussion? Councilmember Lissay.
It's more than $41,000. There's changes to multiple line items on this budget. There's changes to the administrative department. There's changes at the North Bend Police Services Fund. There's changes in the streets. What was called Street Maintenance Fund is now called Streets Revenue Fund. Before we go amending for $41,000 because we've got a hot potato that sounds like it's a good idea, because we can just get rid of it and maybe distract us from all the other things that have changed, I think we need to get into some deliberations and talk about these items and figure out why there are, I think I found a half a dozen items that have different numbers than what we ended the meeting last time with. So I encourage council to vote no against the motion, and let's talk about these things as a group so we can get a balanced budget that we thought we had to where we know we have.
Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Mayhew.
So I would like Drew to go upstairs and do the reconciliation of what happened between the last iteration and this iteration.
And I'd rather he not, because we're just going to get way into the weeds here, folks. Councilmember Mayhew, unless there's a majority that would like Drew to go get the material. All right, I don't see any nod of heads. Councilmember Mayhew.
am very interested in the items that Councilmember Lissay just brought up, but I would point out that we did discuss changing the name of the fund at the last meeting, and we did agree to that. In fact, we definitely agreed to that change in fund balance name, and I still do agree with that. So I think that's not one of the items, but the other items you mentioned, I think I would like to hear about.
We didn't vote on a lot of things.
Councilmember Lissay.
I'm less worried about the name of the fund. I'm more worried about that the number changed, that the amounts in that fund are different, especially considering their revenue funds. And we were basing our discussion at the last meeting on those revenues.
All right, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor
Of what?
of the motion?
Oh, yeah, that.
To remove the 41,
Sorry, that was
the
my
motion you made,
sorry.
I believe,
That was like
Councilor Song.
a minute ago.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, the 41,000 is removed.
I have a feeling we're not done.
Councilmember Mayhew.
I wonder if we could perhaps have Councilmember Lissay repeat the list of items that he's noted, and perhaps we could ask for some input from staff as to what those changes were.
Councilmember Lissay, are you prepared to go through the items you have questions on?
I can go these. I've tried to tag them here. So as we just discussed, the administrative department's fund has changed. It's more than $41,000. It's changed, yeah, I guess it is. Is it 41? I can't add today. Yes, that one is 41, so that'd take care of that. The non-departmental amounts changed.
Is it by the amount of the services?
I don't know.
That's where the contingency was. Was it by the amount of the
I
contingency?
would like an explanation. That's why
It's
I'm saying
lower.
it's just, let me just go through the items that have changed, and we can get an
Okay,
explanation. That'd be
sorry,
great.
start over. Yeah, number one is,
So administrative department
Yeah.
amount changed. The non-departmental amount changed. The North Bend Police Services Fund amount changed. The Human Services Fund amount changed, but we know that. The Street Revenue Fund estimated revenues changed. And the Community Development Fund changed. In addition to that, there are some funds that were removed. Parks and Playgrounds Capital Fund was removed. The 202 corridor, no, wait, do you see these? Some of these are in different order now. One was called the Construction Contingency Fund. Now the 316 was once called the Construction Contingency, or was called the River 202 Corridor Phase 2 Construction Fund. Now it's called the Construction Contingency Fund. And that, I'm not sure what happened with that, because now it went from 0 to 449,000. And then I saw one more. No, I can't. I guess I didn't, that was it. Yeah, that was it. So an item of Fund 001, two parts of 001, administrative departments and non-departmental. Fund 14 is different. Fund 16 is different. Fund 101 is different. Fund 130 is different. 303 is different, and 316 is different.
Let me know if you want me to start.
Start at the top.
Okay, thank you. As Councilmember Mayhew pointed out, the non-departmental fund change, that was the contingency that we had in there for 2 years. So again, we have a 0 for the contingency in 2019. 2020, we reduced the contingency to 105,000. In addition, if you're looking at the ordinance itself in administrative departments, we also have the transfers out in non-departmental. So if you're looking actually at this category, that would have changed, meaning on the adopted budget itself, that would have changed or the proposed budget.
I can't see what you're pointing at.
Sorry.
Just maybe shake it around a little. Oh, there it is. Okay.
In the administrative department. So this would change because we had a general fund support of 200,000 transfer out for streets in 2020. Of course, we're putting streets in so that we've eliminated that transfer out. So again, increase, you have an expenditure of 105,000 for contingency in the second year. Took out the 200,000, took out the 435,000 for contingency the first year. And we'll take out the 41,000 as discussed in there. So moving on to North Bend Police Services, this is something where we apologize, we did have an inaccurate number in there. We should have should have matched the contract. And so we're matching the contract that we have with them, which is 1949, and they had just made this agreement, I believe.
This is we're still anticipating this. This is the proposal for the agreement, the revenues versus expenditures. It's just a wash. There shouldn't be any other numbers on there.
And it wasn't in there before at all.
Right.
Correct.
Right?
But we still have to appropriate it.
Right. But it wasn't in there, okay.
Well, before you jump away from that, that's what I want to understand, is last week, there was a estimated beginning fund balance for 2019 of 436,000. Now it says zero.
Yeah, that's correct. That should not have been
Okay, so
there.
it's all across the board
That's
that
housekeeping
that
internally.
completely changed, and it's now it's zeroing out
Wrong one?
based
Correct.
upon the contract
That
negotiation.
is correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Mayhew?
But it doesn't really go to zero, right? There's usually some residual in there, right?
Some residual in there, but the determination of where it's housed, it's more of a housekeeping thing that we have to
I see.
look into and research internally.
But the point would be is am I correct in believing that to the extent there's any residual in fund balance related to that contract, that we have taken the point of view that that should be spent back into that contract, that in essence that's belongs to that contract? Or have we not taken that view?
The view was that the revenue should pay for the expenditures. And when we do the internal accounting, obviously it's based on estimated costs for officers, salaries, officers overtime. So we're going to be exact every year? Absolutely not.
Right.
So we could maintain that, but it comes down to the actual accounting of all of those activities. And so we proposed for 2019 to show that it's a contract payment. So the contract revenue should pay for the contract expenditures. But we can certainly talk further going into 2019 about the residual, because I wouldn't expect it to penny out, frankly. So we just haven't made a policy decision about where those monies lie.
Okay, but in any event, it'd be a very small amount, is that
It's supposed
right?
to be, that's correct.
Thanks.
The Human Services, you didn't have any questions on that. Is that correct, Councilmember Lassay?
No, that's understood. We understand that one.
So street fund revenues, I did mention this back here. So because we're moving streets into general fund, as far as the streets operations, we have two dedicated revenue sources to streets. We actually have three total sources, two dedicated revenue sources that go to streets now that are dedicated, which are that's right here, the gas tax plus the solid waste fees. We also had the $150 additional in REIT that were instead going to the streets revenue that's going directly to general fund. So instead of transferring it twice, we're transferring it once from REIT to general fund, again, for capital maintenance of streets.
So
Councilmember Lassay?
try to follow procedure. So where does that add up to then? Where am I finding that?
So that's 260
Streets
plus
revenue fund are
312.
101?
260 plus 312 is going to 101. So we're taking, because those are dedicated revenue sources that are housed in 101. So 260 plus 312 is essentially this. And then
Gosh, you went
plus
so
Going too
fast.
fast, yeah.
I don't know what you pointed at.
Okay. So 260 plus 312 is essentially this figure here, the 571 and the 582. We're going to transfer that amount each year. You can see the straight transfer of those revenues into general fund for the streets operations.
And those equal which two things?
Gas
the other
tax and the solid waste fee.
150,000.
Solid waste
So,
gas
but the
tax.
solid waste fee
Okay.
is not externally restricted, right?
No.
So why don't we just take it straight into 01? Why is it going through this other fund?
It's always traditionally been in that other fund. So at this point, we wanted to look at our policies to make sure we don't have any council policies that would restrict that. I do not believe we do, but we just need to further research on that. That's an easy fix if you want me to do that. That's
Councilmember
fine.
Mayhew,
We do have a council policy, yeah.
and it may be, I don't have the franchise agreement in front of me, but it may be that the agreement with the hauler that allows us to impose a fee commits us to spend that on streets maintenance. Would not surprise me. I can pull that to be sure. So there may be, in essence, a contractual limitation on that revenue source.
An enforceable?
If it's part of our franchise with the hauler, then it would be.
And then the 150 from for the capital maintenance is going directly into the general fund. So that is allocated directly to the general fund. That's the difference.
So on that,
Councilor Mercy.
yeah, on that topic then, at our last meeting, the proposed fund schedule for the now the Streets Revenue Fund had a estimated revenue of $714,500 in 2019 and an estimated revenue of $914,500 in 2020. Now it's showing up as 571 and 582 respectively.
Right, because we were transferring.
You took the fund balance out of it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
We were transferring REIT into there as well.
Okay, so where's REIT going now then?
So REIT again, we had 150,000.
150,000, yeah,
And
where's
that's going
that?
directly to general fund.
Okay,
Because streets is now in general fund. So instead of thinking of the expenditures in 101, the expenditures are coming out of the general fund. So it'd be the same thing as parks, same thing as police, same thing as fire.
So the fees and tax are going into 101. The REIT's going directly into 01.
Yeah.
As rolled up under the estimated revenues up there.
Yeah, to Councilmember Mayhew's discussion, so we know for certain on gas tax, we actually did some research. We contacted MRSC and the state auditor's office to make sure, what can we do? What can we use it for? There did not seem to be any restriction against using it for or transferring it to activities as long as it's shown. But we believe that it should be in its, at least on the revenue side, keep it as its own fund. We
And
can
I
transfer
wasn't
it out.
questioning that one, I was
Yeah,
questioning the other one.
Yeah, the other one we can look at later on, but unless you want us to break really fast and look at it now, then we can.
I think personally, I think it's fine for tonight.
Sure.
Yeah.
We can always come back to F&A later.
Whether you run it through a fund, it's in another fund unnecessarily or not, it's still ending up where it's going to end up, so it's fine.
And Councilmember Lassay, back to your point on community development funds. So again, we did change the amounts of the enhancement for housing. And I am going to jump really fast, and I apologize.
Because
On
of the change in how we-
affordable housing study, so again, instead of 200,000 the first year,
That's where it moved.
115,000, then 85,000. And then parks and playground, you said it wasn't there, it's,
It is. It's gone from, it was previously 300,000 and 300,000. Now it's 0, and it's an estimated revenue of 300,000, but no expenditure.
it's right there. I don't know which, maybe there's a wrong version.
Which one?
Okay, there it is. It was, no, I'm saying previously it was 0, now it's the 300 in there. So where's that, what's the 300 for?
That 300, that,
It wasn't in the budget for December 4th, but now it's showing up. So that's the difference. So what's that 300? Because that's not something that we had previously.
So I think we talked previously at the December 4th budget that we were going to budget for just not necessarily, well, for any capital expenditures that might take place during Q1 of 2018. In addition, we're kind of anticipating or looking forward, how much are we likely going to spend for 2019 in terms of parks and playground expenditures, subject to an improvement in the capital improvement plan. So all we're doing is trying to plan ahead, because if we were to amend the budget in the future, it would require a supermajority. If you were to adopt the CIP, that would require a simple majority, and according to our ordinance, if you adopt the CIP by reference, you are therefore falling in line with the budget ordinance as we're approving today.
I guess I understand that. So if we've added, now we have 300,000 in revenue and 300,000 expenditure for both 19 and 20, where we didn't have it in 19 and 20, where's it coming from?
REIT.
REIT.
Okay.
Just
Just slide 11.
So 303.
Yeah, so this is the annual here. So that was just the annual transfer we had to REIT. So before we were doing the revenues, but then we decided at the last council meeting to make sure we're appropriating both years. Again, it's up to the council to actually itemize and approve the CIP that would go to that, so it's not just going to be immediately spent. But some of the I know Parks project was mentioned earlier, and we're envisioning and anticipating that project to be spent out of this fund. Because again, we're trying to separate capital from operating.
Okay.
Did that make sense to you?
It makes sense. It just magically appeared from somewhere.
Yeah. He's moving it from REIT. It used to be in 116.
And then Fund 316,
Not reduced.
the Construction Contingency Fund, this is the fund that was discussed in executive session last week. And so this is money that we're appropriating just in case with some of the projects and some of the discussions that we had. And that's $449,374. Again, there's nothing attached to that.
Remarkably close to the contingency.
I've got other
Okay.
items once you're done with your
And
list.
then I missed one, so that was the, thanks for the explanation on those. I missed one, 2020, 401 went from last week, did I get it wrong? Wait, no, I'm off. Never mind. That is the same. I was seeing things. Forget that. That was okay.
Do we have just a?
Councilmember Mayhew, and then Councilmember Shepherd.
So I have two broad items. One is I've got some questions about broadly capital funds as well as I've got a concern and a solution to my concern if it makes sense. But the other thing is I have on two funds just questions about amounts. On Fund 501, which is Equipment Repair and Replacement Fund, the expenditure number for 19 tonight is $2,006,263. I believe that the slide from our last meeting had that amount at $1,974,680, and I'm wondering why that changed.
We don't recall that, I apologize. We can do some further research if you want to.
Well, we don't have much time to do
Who was on
research.
this? Are you talking about this one?
Otherwise, we'll be doing a motion to put some meetings back
Yeah,
in.
that's
Isn't that the
what- that's
197?
502.
What number does that have?
It has,
It's on 502.
like it's the same. For 501, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Does it have 2006? It does?
Yeah, 2006, yeah.
It's the same across the board.
All right, so I'm looking at, what is this piece of,
That might have been from 2 weeks ago.
It's November 11th.
this
Be at
might,
the top.
is this from before?
That's November 11th.
That was like 9 meetings ago.
Fine. The thing is, that could be true. All right, I won't worry about that. So then I have some, and then my other number question was in Fund 122. There's a revenue number of 67,258 in each of the 2 years. What is that revenue?
So we have been transferring from the general fund each year for, I don't know if Dan's here, several years now. This is for the Jeannie Hansen Field turf replacement. It's just building up the turf replacement.
So it's not a revenue, it's a fund transfer?
Yes, but it's increasing the fund balance.
I understand. And what fund is it coming from?
General.
From 001. So if I look up into 001, is it in one of those expenditure rows? And if so, which one?
So where it says non-departmental, including transfers to other funds.
Okay, so in that 1.418 million, there is 67,258, which we're putting down to 122.
Yes. And that's been going on for a few years now.
For it's very differing amounts, yeah. Okay, I'm just trying to understand the math. Okay. All right, well then I have, I don't know if it's my turn, Mayor. I can wait. I have some questions about capital funds.
Perhaps we give Councilmember Shepherd a chance to state some questions and then come back around.
Yeah, so if this had been done the way that I'd rather have seen it done, it would have not been changed as much from the last budget as we've done this year. And I feel like I'm really having a hard time keeping up with what we're talking about in general. This is the most, well, this is fine, but I see us making a lot of changes at the 11th hour, and I can't compare that table to another table and really assess what all the net changes are. And it would have really been nice to get digital forms of this information in order to use a spreadsheet and to do this functionally. But I guess my one concern is we talked about possibly only appropriating a portion of the spending, and I don't see where that's talked about in this budget. Are we only going to appropriate a few months' worth of spending? We've talked about that.
No, this appropriates a full 2 years of expenditures for operating. It was strictly talking about so few capital items that would need to continue in the first quarter while the council deliberates on the rest of the capital improvement.
Oh, I thought it was across the board that
No,
you
no,
were
no,
doing.
just for some capital.
Okay. And where is that captured as far as that? I mean, what is the worst-case scenario of what they're going to need when they come back as far as budget?
Explain worst-case scenario?
Well, you're under budgeting, I'm assuming, for capital expenditures, correct?
So what we've done again is, per the council direction last time, we appropriated certain amounts that will be for the year on several of these funds to, one, maintain operations for the first few months, but two, have council come back and, in the language of the ordinance, per council to come back and prioritize and pass those projects. So there is ample funding at this point. We have a couple funds that we are not appropriating that the council will be discussing more in detail during the retreat and during the capital sessions that are upcoming, hopefully in early spring or late winter, to decide if they want to appropriate some of that fund balance for projects. So there's two different pots, so to speak. We have.
How big are those pots?
Well, again, if you look at, for example, when we talked about the facilities capital fund.
Can't see where the red dot is.
Oh, I haven't done it yet. Sorry. That's so I think we just spoke about the fund balance in 101, for example, the 1,056,000. That's one of them.
Page
Again,
7.
We're not appropriating that.
Page 7, very top line on page 7.
We're not appropriating
Top slide,
that money?
top line. Oh, I'm sorry, did you say 101, Robert, or 1?
101. We're not appropriating that money. The other large fund we're not appropriating that money would be the facilities capital fund.
Page 7 of the presentation.
Facilities
Right.
capital fund.
And if you look under total general funds in the middle, the lighter pink just go from 011 down to 101, street revenue fund.
Okay.
Got it there.
So we're looking.
I know it's
at-
really small.
Yeah, I can't, this is so small I can't even read it.
It should be on here.
It is, I thought ordinance.
Yeah. Yeah, so, streets fund, 101.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that the entire bucket that we're not deciding on?
No, this is fund balance accumulated from streets, as we discussed last time, that we are not appropriating at this meeting. That will be discussed at a future date with council when we talk about capital. The other fund as well that we've discussed at previous workshops is the facilities capital fund. This again is the accumulated construction revenues from sales tax that is accumulated over time. This is going to be talked about, discussed during the council retreat that's upcoming. And also, when we talk about the capital budgeting, the council will decide whether or not to appropriate any funding from it and what to prioritize those projects from that fund balance that's accumulated over several years.
Okay.
Hope that makes sense.
So is that about $5 billion we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Million.
Councilmember Sunwall, and then I'll come, I'm going to do, Jim.
No,
I'm gonna do it round
I was
robin.
going to ask the question a different way, but I think she got her question answered, so I'm good. Thanks.
I don't see any other hands up. I'll come back to Councilmember Mayhew.
All right, so the concern with capital spending that we've been trying to grapple with is that we all have not looked at a capital budget as part of this process. And we did that intentionally. We decided that given the timing and the significance of really thinking through capital funding and different categories and thinking about revenue sources and trying to think about long-term, what those charts look like out a few years, that we wanted to spend more time with that. So that was the decision we made. The problem that created was that if during this budget process we don't appropriate some capital spending, so worst case if we appropriate nothing, then all capital projects shut down January 1st. So the one item that we talked, or one approach we talked about for a while, was appropriating enough for a few months. We ended up moving away from that. And the solution that administration proposed was go ahead and appropriate basically most of the capital spending for the biennium that we think we might do, but put in the restriction into the budget ordinance that says none of that can be spent unless we approve it going into the CIP. So it would allow us to continue to control the expenditure of that money, but it would be in the appropriation, which we only ideally do once a biennium with a mid-year update or mid-biennium update. So that's what they've brought here. Now the thing is, there's some challenges with this because there are a bunch of funds with fund balance that we may or may not choose to use. So administration is going to come to us with proposals. Perhaps use some fund balance this way, maybe some that way, apply some revenues in this manner, apply some, so, and then we're going to struggle with that, and we're going to end up with something that we can't foresee today. So what they've tried to do, if I understand this correctly, is put enough appropriation in each of the years, so enough appropriation in the biennium to cover sort of ongoing expenditures they think that they're pretty confident we'll be doing over the next 2 years. And then they've got some fund balances which we may or may not choose to use, but since we haven't talked about it, they just, I think this is the wording, I was kind of saying, what do you mean by set aside? And I think what they mean by that is we're just leaving it sit until that discussion happens. So this fund is one of those, and there are fund balance in a bunch of other funds as well that we may use or we may shift and designate for future use. So there's going to be some fund balances we're going to move around in here, and there's a bunch of them in there. So that's my understanding, and please, administration, correct me if that's wrong, but that's my general understanding of what we've done here.
Right, and generally that's absolutely right, and just the additional clarification I would offer is the difference between the fund balances in the facilities capital, for example, or streets maintenance, is that when council does decide to appropriate those somewhere, that's going to be either through a budget amendment or the mid-biennium adjustment. If it happens in an amendment, you may need a supermajority. The appropriations, where those are shown subject to the limitation for a project inclusion on a CIP, this capital improvement program, that's a decision that council can make for those projects by simple majority by approving the program. So there's a difference in how you may proceed to spend those two different pots of money after your additional. But you exactly described
fantastic.
How it's set up.
I think administration has come back with a very workable way of implementing what we're working through, and I'm completely supportive of this approach. But to that end, I'm just worried about a few funds here because the way this ordinance is currently worded in Section 4, we specify certain funds, but there are 5 funds which I'm worried about ought to also be in this limitation. And so some of them are not designated as capital funds, but I think that the fund balance that's there is intended for capital purpose, I think. Anyway, it isn't part of this operating budget that we've been talking about, so I think we need to do something with it. I think that what we do is we take these funds and simply add them to the fund listing under Section 4, but the funds I'm concerned about are 101, 120, 313, 316, and then 417.
Can you say that again, maybe more slowly for the?
No, I can say it really fast.
A little bit faster.
101,
120,
120,
313,
313, 316,
and 417.
and 417. And
Where are you moving those to?
I would just add those to the listing in section 4 of the ordinance, which would make the spending of amounts out of those funds subject to that CIP being added to the CIP. I think that's matches the intent, but I'm not sure, maybe
Can I ask a
city could.
clarification? So you have
Councilmember Ross?
417, which is the utility capital fund, and it states in there that it's for the non-utility capital.
Yeah, so we'd have to take out the words non-utility from that, from section 4. The words non-utility would have to be struck in order for that to work. But to the point here on the utilities, I don't believe that in any of the presentations we've sat through that we've talked about the utilities CIP spending. So I think it's largely driven by the utilities CIP, so I don't think this is really I don't think I'm raising something that's controversial. Just the way to just close this out then is to just remove the words non-utility, add 417 in, and it just says we're spending on stuff that's in the CIP, which includes then the utility CIP.
And the reason for council's benefit that it's drafted to not include Fund 417 is because there is already a utility CIP that's been approved by council. The funds that are here include the bond revenues that are to pay for the already approved projects, and I didn't want to create any uncertainty or confusion that there might be some additional utility CIP approval that was required before those expenditures could be made, since a number of those projects are ongoing. And the same is true for Fund 120, I think, which is the Riverwalk Fund, where we've got contracts in place and that council has already approved, and relatively limited amounts in those funds. Going forward, it seemed like those are things council had approved, and it would make sense for the expenditures to be carried out consistent with the previous council approval. So that's why you don't see those fund numbers included in that list in section 4. Obviously, you can change it, but I just wanted to give you some insight into the rationale in drafting the ordinance.
Councilmember Ross.
So why wouldn't we include some of the other, like 319 and 320 and all the other capital funds that are not listed in the resolution then?
So my own thought of why I didn't include them on my list was that there were small amounts where they hadn't asked for any expenditure. And so it didn't seem that it was anything was needed.
Robert, did you want to speak to your perspective on including or not including any of the ones that were listed by Councilmember Mayhew?
That's correct. And like, for example, for 320, we believe there still might have been a payment left for a completed project. There might be a payment left, so it would be restricted at this time.
I guess I was speaking of these other ones, the 101, 120 with 313, 316. No concern.
And I'm sorry, I misspoke when I referred to 120 as the Riverwalk. That's the Riverfront Acquisition Program that's been ongoing for a number of years, and council has recently approved other acquisitions there too. So the Riverwalk is 313.
I guess what I'm asking is you have no concerns if those numbers are included in section 4 of the ordinance?
For 101, Drew brought up a good point to me. I guess the question to council, this would be for council, is if 101 was restricted, does that mean nothing from 101 can be transferred until a CIP is passed?
Would mean that, I guess.
And if that took several months, might that create a problem with some projects that are in the pipeline?
Or streets capital maintenance.
Well, we're not dictating the accounting. We're just appropriating for spending, right? And putting limits around spending. I think they can figure out the accounting.
Right, but part of what's shown for 101 is the transfer out to the general fund for streets capital maintenance. Operating costs. For the operating costs. So would you be subjecting the, or would the council, by placing that limitation, be intending to subject a CIP limitation on the daily ongoing streets capital operating?
The 571 includes operating? I thought you separate, because up here, streets, I see 1184376 in 001.
571 was being transferred to 101. That was the gas tax and the franchise fee, as we talked about.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
still 101.
misunderstood.
But I think, to get to your point, we
no, in
probably
that
don't
case,
need
I
to
would
do
draw
that with
101.
101 because you can appropriate and then we move it into the streets capital like we talked about.
No, I just didn't know what was happening in 101. Now that I understand it, I don't think
Or should
anything's
you not
needed.
include 101?
Yes, I think that should be excluded.
Do you want to make a motion to amend the?
I'm just, well, before can we clarify what numbers everybody's in agreement with including and not? If 417 is out, you listed 101, 120, 313, 316, 417. I thought I heard 417 out, 101 out. Is everybody okay with?
I don't think 417 should be out. We have not gone through, I mean, absent a presentation to us explaining why we should approve expenditures of that amount in 417, I would not vote for that.
I think the
We've
concerns
received no
expressed by the city
presentation on that.
attorney was a confusion that it might create with the current bond funds, or did you want to restate that, Bob, at all?
Right. Those expenditures are to fund the ongoing projects that were funded by the bond, and that, as council will recall, during, I think, some of the bond attorney presentations, the bond ordinance was subject to the reasonable anticipation of expenditure of 85% of those proceeds within a certain time period. And so these expenditures, in my understanding, are included in the budget in part to meet that timetable, as well as to fund the projects that are largely ongoing at this time and for which contracts have been let. So that's the need for the expenditure. It wasn't clear to me why council would want to impose another utility CIP approval limitation ahead of those expenditures, since the CIP has already been approved by council.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So what proportion of the bond money has already been spent?
I'd have to run a year-to-date, but I can say we'd have to get back to an exact amount.
If we're going to get back, it better be within the next hour or less.
I'd say between 10, 11 million's been spent and 17 appropriated through contracts.
Pardon? Councilmember Mayhew?
Yeah, contract doesn't appropriate anything.
No, it's obligated, though.
Yes, but he said appropriated.
Contracted.
Yeah.
So I think there's a misunderstanding. So first off, I agree with everything the city attorney said, but I would add that Fund 417 does not only spend bond proceeds. It's our entire utility CIP, some of which is funded by rates. That was a discussion that the council went through, and a conscious decision was made. I wasn't part of the council then, but I know you had debates about what percentage of utilities ought to be paid by the next generation versus the current generation, and there are, in the rate study, specific amounts during that 6-year CIP that come from operating funds. So it's more than the bond proceeds. And my only point is, we are responsible, the city council is responsible for all monies that are spent. We have to appropriate every amount. And so there is, I guess I'm misunderstanding. I think, my understanding, there is a CIP in place right now.
Correct.
And it goes out for another 2 years. And it is my belief that this ordinance, as written, says that anything on that CIP list you can continue to spend money on right now, immediately, the day, an hour after we pass this. Well, on just January 1st, I suppose. So I don't think we have to go through another approval of CIP. It's just to get more projects on there, we have to approve an amendment to the CIP. And I would have thought that's the same with the utility CIP. So my thought was, this 417 proposal is I thought, not controversial, because I thought that the amounts listed there probably match up to a utilities CIP list. And so we're just saying, so the only reason that this would be objectionable is if for some reason that amount doesn't match the utilities CIP. And if that's the case, then I don't want to approve it without a presentation as to why it doesn't match.
I think just one comment I want to make about restricting the utility capital fund. There is cash-funded CIP. That's part of the rate study. These numbers came out of the rate study and what they anticipate. I think since we are operating, as you said, under an existing two-year CIP, we're also operating under bond covenants with a new bond agreement. I think if you run the risk of, say, hypothetically, I'm not saying this would happen, but hypothetically, if the council did not pass a new project list next year and they because I know that they're doing they're doing a master plan study right now that they're going to come back to council actually in late spring. We're trying to get it as fast as we can because that'll plan not just next year, but the next 5 years and what we need to do proceeding with rates and everything else going into the future. However, the problem, I think the concern that we have is the question is if we could possibly run afoul of the bond covenants. We could possibly not spend the money in the amount of time, and we risk penalties from the IRS and everybody else if for some reason council deadlocked on what those projects were and we couldn't spend additional funds in the future, especially since it's already been appropriated. In
So I am strongly against the notion that the city council is irresponsible and doesn't understand that we need to spend the bond proceeds on approved projects. And so the notion that we have to abdicate our appropriation of those amounts and just appropriate the whole thing and let administration take it from there, I don't think that's how this process works.
I don't think anyone was
Right,
suggesting
and
that, Councilmember Mayhew. I think it's more of an issue of no one's being suggesting they're irresponsible or not cognizant of their duties. It's a matter of sometimes things tend to take 2 or 3 times longer to get done than we assume starting out. So I think the concern is if the timelines on the things that are on your plate end up slipping, then it could put it at risk. But Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Ross.
So I think the way things should be working is that whatever we have contracted to do, we've already had council approve it. So I don't think that there's anything out there that hasn't already been approved. Now, whether it's appropriated or not, I don't know, but if we've approved something to become a contract, to be purchased, then we're obligated to follow through. And I think we should appropriate whatever we've already agreed to and to go ahead and appropriate those amounts of money. It sounds like we've got maybe 2/3 of the amount of bonds that we've already received have already been committed by contract at least. We may be looking at another $10 million that we have to decide what to do with. Anyway, those were.
Everyone else is missing, Drew. Maybe that question goes to you.
Well, I was gathering my papers. Do you mind repeating your question?
Basically, if we haven't appropriated the money for utility spending, if it has to do with the bond revenue, then we probably already contracted at least 2/3 of that amount of money that we received. And if we've already somehow agreed to it, contracted for it, it has to have already been approved by council, and I'm sure that's what happened. However, there's probably another 1/3 that hasn't been determined what to do with it, hasn't come to council. Does that sound about right?
Well, I would say that we've approved a CIP. We went through a whole bond conversation probably in May or June where we included a table that ran for a 6-year period.
Right.
So we do have some idea of exactly how we anticipate spending that money in 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022.
I'm just thinking in terms of actual contracts that have been let, as far as, and things that have been approved specifically per each contractual transaction. We've already got about 2/3 of that determined and committed, right?
I would have to go back and actually do some research to get those numbers for you, but I would say that's
in the ballpark.
Feels right in the ballpark.
So we got another 1/3 to determine within 2 years of when we got the money.
Councilor Ross, and then Councilor Mayhew.
So okay, So there's two things up there. One is the bond, and one is the rates that we're going to receive through the capital fund, right? Utility capital fund. So is the issue about appropriating the rates? Because we're already appropriating the 21 million bond through the CIPs that we have? Is that, do you get the question? We have rates and we have the bond, right? And so we already have the projects for the bond. We've approved it through the CIP, but we have rates over here that hasn't been appropriated towards some of those projects. Is that correct?
Do you want me to take a shot?
Go ahead, Councilmember Mayhew.
Yes. Go ahead, Councilmember.
Let me see if I can help. So if you look at Fund 401, 402, and 403, the rates that we charge show up in those revenue columns. Then you look at the expenditures. That includes both operating expenses and money that's moving down to 417. Okay? In 417, then, that's where we're going to do our capital expenditures, not our operating expenditures, our capital expenditures. So we appropriate expenditures. That's what the appropriation process, right? It's expenditures. So the other way to say is we approve or budget expenditures. So the question that we're kind of kicking around here is that Fund 417 expenditures, you know, well, whether we just leave the number there that's been put in, or whether put some kind of restriction on, I'm proposing we put some kind of restriction on it. The other point of view would be no, that, you know, you've appropriated that amount. And it's been pointed out that, well, that we'd appropriate, I would just leave it at that. I guess that would be the amount we appropriate, and that's that. So that's the question.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense, because the rates, as you said, is 1, 2, and 3. We're not talking about appropriating those right now.
We don't appropriate rates.
In which
No, I
case,
know.
the council will
The
be coming back for
funds
approvals on each and
caused
every
by
individual
rates.
project anyway, so.
We're not talking about rates.
Right, and that,
The funds,
Yeah,
1, 2, and 3,
yeah. Those
which
are the operating
includes
funds.
the rates.
Yes.
Right, okay.
and just a reminder to council too, to circle back to a comment that was made, the appropriation authorizes the expenditure, but for capital projects, that's not the only council approval that's required. The design contracts still have, the designers have to be selected, those contracts are approved by council. The project either utilizes a small works bid, those construction contracts come back before the council. So it's not as if by putting the number in Fund 417 without a limitation that the city's going to go out and spend $20 million without, you know, any further council review or oversight or decision. That's not how it works. But what we're trying to do is make clear that from a budgetary standpoint, the expenditure is authorized so that when we are in front of you with a contract or a bid, we don't also have to then stop and consider, is some additional extraordinary budgetary authorization required to be packaged in? And you might remember we had those conversations a few times the past year. So we're just trying to make this as clean as possible for those types of projects where the funds have been in and the CIP's been approved by council, and we have a reasonable estimate of what those things are going to cost, and that's the number, whether it's a blend of bond revenues and rates, but that's the number that my understanding is in Fund 417 proposed for appropriation.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, so my point is just merely this. If you look at Fund 417, between 19 and 20, it's $19 million of expenditure. I haven't seen any detail. I don't know why is that number that particular number instead of some other number? I just don't know. We haven't been presented anything during this process. So my solution to that is just as with the other CIP where we also haven't been given that detail. My thought is, fine, if that's the number, let's trust, as we have with the other CIP, that they've come up with a pretty good number. But until we've seen that and approved the CIP, or adjustments to the existing CIP that I assume that matches up to, that we just put the same restriction as the other. That's all I'm proposing, same as the other utility funds. We don't know the detail yet, so yeah, fine, we'll appropriate that money, but subject to us approving the CIP. So it has to get on the CIP through us first. That's all.
I just want to make one comment. This detail was provided to council as part of the revenue bond update in June. That also included the cash-funded CIP projects as well. So that was provided.
Councilmember Stonewall.
Isn't the CIP in 417 already approved?
Yes. Which is why we didn't include 417 in section 4 because council has approved it already, and I didn't want to create the impression that there was additional utility CIP approval that might be required, and I think Councilmember Mayhew indicated he wasn't intending that for projects that are on the current CIP. So sort of a lawyer's rule in drafting, when in doubt, if it's going to create more confusion, keep it out. That's why I did.
Just a quick question. Am I correct in believing that 859, sorry, I'm trying to read that number, 417, the 19 expenditure, 8590590, am I correct in believing that that number does not agree to the dollar to what's in the 2019 utility CIP?
I believe that's an estimate, but any changes come to FNA, come to the Public Works Committee.
I'm just saying that that number doesn't agree to the utility CIP.
Right, because the CIPs are not budget documents, they're not appropriations.
That's my point.
Right.
Bingo. That's exactly the point I'm making.
You approve the projects in the CIP, and then we bring you a budget that reflects those projects, and then you see the real numbers to the extent that we know them now, because some of the projects that are in the CIP haven't been bid yet.
Councilmember Stonewall.
So I think, and we're talking about basically two CIPs here, I think. We're talking about one that's already been approved, utility CIP. And then we're talking about this CIP that needs to be done for non-utility capital projects that we're going to talk about in Q1 of next year. And to me, I guess I don't want to follow my sword over it either way. I guess, to me, they're two very distinct things. One has already been approved, and one hasn't even been discussed to even come forth for approval. And so that's why I can understand why there's a distinction between the two.
Mayor, could I speak?
Councilmember Mayhew.
Just to clarify, both CIPs are currently approved. There is a CIP, an approved CIP. There is an approved utility CIP. They're both approved. The approved CIP only has a 2-year horizon on it. The utility CIP goes out, I want to say 4, maybe a little long, 4 years. But they're both approved. The issue is that in particular, the non-utility CIP, the administration really wants to look at that and substantially change it. But there's an approved CIP. That's what all the projects that are ongoing, and probably most of what will go on the first half anyway, if not most of 19, are all on that CIP.
Bob.
Right. That's correct. And we don't, as Finance Director Hamid was saying, we don't want to create any issues with the bondholders or complicate things potentially with post-bond issuance disclosures we might have to make by including an additional approval or implying that there's some additional approval process for utility projects. That's why we're trying to avoid it.
That could risk delays. Project delays due to a more cumbersome approval process, once again. Councilmember Stonewall.
So my question to my fellow council members is, what do we have left to hash out?
Well, on this one, can I first
It would
see
appear
where there's...
Jim might have an answer.
I'm sorry? Well, can we come to some agreement? Well, the question sort of implied that this one was resolved. I'm wondering if, I wanted to clarify on 101 was out. Was there any remaining issues, staff, on fund as proposed by Councilmember Mayhew, 120, 313, and 316? Okay, fine with adding those. All right. Councilmember Stonewall, back to your question then. I mean, I guess I would encourage the council or someone to make a motion at this point so we can move along here. Councilmember Mayhew.
So I have a question about this wording in section 1 of the budget ordinance. There's a sentence that says a complete copy of the 2019-2020 biennial budget is on file with the city clerk of the city of Snoqualmie. I'm wondering what that is referring to.
And we can make copies
I
available.
have no idea what she's holding up. It just looks like some paper.
So we printed out an extract of the line item budgets for the entire budget.
But the line item budget is an administrative
County tool,
document.
not a budget.
It's not the budget, so why are we referring to it in the ordinance?
We're just tracking the statute, which authorizes you to adopt a budget by reference, subject to the requirement to show the budget, the revenues and appropriations for each fund, which is in Section 2.
What I guess what I'm getting
You don't
at is-
have to do it, adopt it in that form. You can adopt it in summary form as shown in Section 2.
That's what I was getting at, is doesn't Section 2 comply with the legal requirement?
Correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So I would like to stop removing all the details of what we're talking about in terms of budget. I would rather not have this just in summary form. I would like to have this available for the public in a detailed format.
I would like someone to make a motion so we can resolve some of these questions and move on.
I move that we modify the wording in Section 1 to remove the sentence, "A complete copy of the 2019-2020 biennial budget is on file with the city clerk of the city of Snoqualmie," that Section 4 be modified to add into the list of funds Fund 120, 313, 316, and 417, and that the words "non-utility" be struck.
Councilmember Summel. I need a second.
Well, it's about that.
You have to second it before.
Okay, second.
All right, a motion and a second is stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Any discussion, Councilmember Summel?
So I'd like to withdraw so I'm wondering if those should be split up, because it's theoretically possible that someone could agree on one of those, but not both of those.
Little dinosaur, change it.
What you could do is just do an amendment to like remove
So I would-
417, debate that, and then,
I would, okay, I would move, is that what we do here? Move.
Yep.
I would move that we split out those two, so that, yeah, is that good enough? Sorry, I'm not feeling well.
So, do you mean to
I think he's splitting
separate
language, separating
the changes to Section 1,
about the reference to the
Yes.
budget, and then
separate those from references to amendments to Section 4?
Correct.
separate those into two separate motions.
Second.
They can get a summary.
Well, I'm actually looking at the person that made the motion.
Yeah,
Oh,
yes.
well, that's your amendment,
That's-
okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a weird one. Okay, how does Ann answer this one? So you split it into two motions, then we have to go back and.
I actually think it would have been easier to withdraw, but if he doesn't agree with
Jim, would
withdrawing,
you be okay to withdraw and motion? those
Withdraw
sep-
the motion.
And then just make another motion, motion them separately. Let's debate one, and then we'll pick up the other one. Let's start with the one on the,
Section 1.
and actually, I would recommend actually splitting it into three. Here's my recommendation.
I got
Move
it.
things-
I got it.
Okay, yeah.
I move that we amend Section 1 to remove the sentence, "A complete copy of the 2019-2020 biennial budget is on file with the city clerk of the city of Snoqualmie."
Second.
Okay, motion and second is stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Any discussion? Councilmember Shepherd.
So I think this just works towards lack of transparency when you constantly are bringing things down to a summary. You don't have any information, any granularity about what's going on. And I would strongly, I'm strongly opposed to that recommendation.
Councilmember Summel.
I would suggest that that level of granularity will absolutely positively change. There's no way the administration knows exactly how many paper clips they're going to need to buy. I'm being sort of facetious, but that's the level of detail you can get into in a budget. It's how many pencils and pens and toner and all that kind of stuff. I believe that this actually gives both the administration and the council more flexibility. And without zero expertise up here, behind these desks, telling an administration how many pencils, how many cars, we have that opportunity every single time money is spent. Every single time. We will have that opportunity to tell them no to pencils, no to cars, whatever it is.
Councilmember Lassay.
I'm kind of struggling with this one. I'll share that openly because I do believe the city should have transparency about what they're spending their money on. I do believe that what's in Section 2 does that. because we agreed and we've practiced this process based upon non-line item budget sort of analysis. I'm sure there's a technical term that a CPA would tell me is a part of that, but I don't think it's really our role to have a detailed line item by line item budget. What we're trying to do is appropriate by fund, appropriate by department, and the city, through the administration and through the mayor, then assigns that, and we then review what's being assigned and determine if it's appropriate. The reason I'm struggling with it is because a question was asked by a council member to provide that complete copy, and only one council member received it. So I have no idea what's in it. How can I determine whether a complete copy, what's the definition of complete? Do we need to define what complete means? Do we need to define what copy means? It just gets it just loses all sense of normalcy. And I think the appropriate thing to do is to publish the budget as it is stated in Section 2, that there is no necessary detail beyond that, because it'll be brought to each committee and to each council meeting to approve agenda bills as they come along. The detail will be added through the course of the calendar years of 2019 and 2020. I don't know if I just went in circles, but the point is that I think I agree with the striking of the text.
Councilmember Mayhew, Councilmember Shepherd, then Sunwell. Oh, Councilmember Shepherd.
Okay. So I did a public records request for detailed records that were supposed to be provided to the city administrator by the finance director by October 1st, according to RCW, and I did. They closed that public records request, and I didn't get anything. And right now, when you look at our website, you see Q1 for 2018 so far, and I'm really concerned. We have a lot of things changing constantly, and it's hard to know what's in a bucket when we don't even have any numbers. We have very little ability to compare history of spending because we're losing all of the labels that we have for what has happened. And I'm very concerned that every time we take away the labels and take away the ability to look at what we've done historically, we're really losing track of what's happened in order to be able to predict what's going to happen in the future. So I'm really concerned that I never received anything in response to a document that
Point of
should
order, Mayor?
exist.
In my view, that topic is not germane to our discussion.
It is germane to this discussion.
You're talking about a public records request that's not germane to the motion on the floor. So if the member could please refocus the comments of the motion on the floor.
So the information I was asking for was having to do with our budget. It was all of the anticipated spending that the city departments were looking for and how that compared to 2017, 2018 with an anticipated what they would end up by end of 2018 and what they needed for 2019 and 2020. That's what they were supposed to give to the city administrator as of October 1st. And that's according to RCW. And
internally, that's what we did now. What I provided
Point
you
of order.
is-
Yes, sir.
In my view, this topic is not germane to our discussion. I believe the chair's already ruled that.
I think there's a nexus there that I'm giving some latitude to Councilmember Shepherd to continue, but if you could, again, kind of wrap up your question or your point.
I see a lot of requests for changes of how we've done it in the past, and I'm not comfortable with the lack of granularity that we have now.
So you're saying, your argument is you need what is not so much a budget, but an administration's workbook in order for you to compare apples to apples on prior year's budgets.
And since I am new and I started in January, I didn't know what to expect. I've not said a whole lot, and I've been looking at what other cities are doing and during their deliberations for budgeting, and they get a lot more detail than what we're getting. And I'm really frustrated with how much the numbers have changed, and the process is constantly changing, and it seems like these this whole grid of numbers, it's impossible to look at this while we're discussing it and being able to really compare what exactly happened from the last time we deliberated. So I'm just seeing a lot of numbers being thrown back and forth, and a real disconnect as far as being able to compare version to version of what's happened, the net change.
Okay.
So I'm really opposed to removing the ability to have this level of detail.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So the analogy I'll use is when my wife and I sit down and do a budget, okay, we have several different line items. We need a number of them so we can be more efficient. But our grocery budget, if we were to do a biennial grocery budget, okay, what I think Councilmember Shepherd is asking for is how much is going to be spent over the next 2 years in dairy, in bread, in meat, in pasta, in soda pop, that level of detail. And I'll tell you what, my wife is an expert shopper. She can't tell you, she has no clue how much she'll spend on dairy in the next 2 years. She has a good idea how much she'll spend on groceries, okay? But no idea on each of that level of detail. And I would not expect anybody in this room to have that same level of detail. We publish that, it'll be wrong. It'll be as wrong as an encyclopedia that used to show up on my door. Remember encyclopedias? All right. That's how wrong it'll be. So this, this thing is what matters. This is the level incorrect version, but this is the level of detail that we have. Because guess what? When they come back for virtually any expenditure, we can debate it then, right? Just like my wife kind of figured out, you know what? Gosh, milk's really expensive. Can we just have more water in our house? When it push comes to shove and it's time to actually spend the money on that, right? But I'm not going to ask her to tell me how many eggs we're going to need over the next 24 months. So you can, what? I don't do bottled water anymore. Have respect for Ms. Lake. I'm bringing a canteen next time.
He's just
remind me, because I'm going to try to do that. That's a good point. I'm done, by the way.
We were doing this. We're going to get back to that. Yeah.
So I called the question.
Second.
All right. Question's been called. All those in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Question's been called. So now we're back to the original motion.
Which?
All those in favor?
Somebody repeat the original.
Okay,
Yeah.
Jim, can you repeat the motion, please?
The motion is that in section 1, we remove the last sentence of section 1.
Right, because they get a summary instead.
Bob, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, if I can, for the maker of the motion, so where the first sentence ends, adopted by reference, would you then mean as shown in section 2?
Just remove the sentence, a complete copy.
Right.
No,
You make a good point.
The motion should be to strike the words, the entire last sentence and the preceding 2 words by reference.
That works.
Okay, everybody understand the motion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, motion carries. Councilmember Mayhew, would you like to make another motion?
I move that in section 4, to the list of funds, we add funds 120, 313, and 316.
Repeat, please.
I move that in section 4, that in the list of funds, we add the funds 120, 313, and 316.
Second.
Okay, motion a second as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Any discussion? Councilmember Jeans.
So 313 is already in there. Are you,
No, it's not.
what's it?
It's not in the 303 or 310, 319.
No, 313 is not.
No, it's not in there. So,
It's 303. Yeah, that's what it might be.
yeah, there's 301 and 303, but not 312.
So I'm going to second that so we can get to discussion.
We did already.
Okay.
Oh, we did? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
about
we're
that.
already at discussion. Councilmember Sunwell?
Can you, Jim, because I know we've discussed this, but maybe in like 2 sentences, summarize why that's important, why those addition, those 3 funds are important?
So those 3 funds are not part of the operating funds that we've discussed before. There's expenditure amounts there. I believe that those are intended to be.
Without a presented plan.
That's right. So this would just make it subject to
Same rules
the
as
same
all the
rules.
others. Okay.
And the administration does not object. Councilmember Shepherd.
So how does this change from what we did at the last budget, this section 4? Is this new?
No, this is in the, I believe this was in the version of the ordinance that was previously presented.
I'm talking about for like 2016,
Oh,
2017.
16, oh, in those budgets,
Or 17, 18.
the expenditures were part of the budget, and so they were therefore appropriations, and they were only then subject to council approval of design and construction contracts, bids, and so forth. This subjects further expenditures from those identified funds to projects that are included in an approved CIP. So what it's essentially doing is appropriating the money, but then, using the term loosely in air quotes, setting it aside subject to the future council non-capital CIP process.
So what is it? I'm still lost in what does this do for us that we didn't have before? What's the net benefit to doing this?
Councilmember Mayhew, if you want to give a shot at answering.
So
You're the motion maker.
So, when you refer to before, you're referring to prior years?
Prior
Yeah.
budgets.
Yeah. So, in prior years, as we came through the budget process, there were presentations about capital budgets and what the capital budgets would be, and so there was time for the council to get comfortable with those particular capital budgets. And so, at the time that the budget ordinance was being passed, all those capital budgets were agreed upon. In our case, we've set aside all the capital budgeting process so that we can do something more in-depth in late winter and spring. So at this point, we're not in agreement as to what the capital expenditures should be. So the problem, though, is if we didn't budget anything for capital expenditures, pending that subsequent discussion, all the capital projects would have to shut down on January 1st. Well, none of us want that. So the idea that's come up with here is to say, well, we have approved the CIP plans, the utility CIP and the regular CIP, and we will approve modifications to those CIP plans in the spring as we go through that process. So the notion here is let's go ahead and appropriate the money. Staff's come up with an amount they think is going to be about what we're going to end up with. And so the compromise is let's go ahead and appropriate those amounts, but add in this wording that says, that tells staff, but you can't spend it on anything that isn't on an approved CIP. So it retains for us the control over what those projects will be, but it also gets us past the hurdle right now of needing to appropriate that money, which is something we do once a biennium.
Councilmember Sunwell.
In reality, they can't spend it even if it is on the CIP if we don't approve it. So I feel like it's sort of just a double measure, which is fine. My expectation, and certainly at least my hope, would be that when we get into the next biennium, we are attacking this a lot earlier so that we would revert back to not needing a section, whatever this is, 4 or whatever it is.
That's absolutely the intent.
So this is this is a Band-Aid of sorts, a bridge to bridge the gap that we have, A, because we're new, B, because he's new, C, because we got started late because of a bond, right? And this is, I think, just the most responsible way to move forward. But I think we'd all agree that this is not how it's going to happen 2 years from now. We're going to go back to where we were, having had the capital conversation as part of the broader conversation. It just, there isn't time to do that with 3 weeks left in the year.
And I think I spoke to Councilmember Mayhew and the mayor about this. I think the goal is to pass a 6-year CIP. That's the goal in the next year, hopefully.
And updated annually. Councilmember Shepherd.
So currently, if something's in the CIP, it's not approved until they actually decide to go to bid for someone to design a project and so forth. Does that still stay the same?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And the same with any contract, even though it's in the CIP, it still has to come to council, and that's not going to change with this.
No.
Does this really change anything? I just checking.
Councilmember Sunwall can answer that.
I mean, I gave you my thoughts on it. I don't know if that's actually correct. That said, I do think what I do like about Councilmember Mayhew's proposal is I think there's a I get hung up on this word, but there's a hygiene around it, right? There's an optics around it that feels like the right way to do it. Does it practically change anything? I don't know, but I think it expresses a commitment to do things the right way in an environment where we're having to push this to a later time than we'd all like to. And so that's why I'm a fan of what he's proposed.
Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to jump in. I think what it does is give you some strategic planning on which projects and in what order, some prioritization in your non-utility capital project expenditures that you wouldn't have if you didn't do the CIP first. And typically we do, as Councilmember Mayhew was explaining and Councilmember Sunwall, and for a variety of reasons that hasn't been able to happen this year.
Councilmember Mayhew.
I really hope this is helpful, but the thing to realize is that our current rules, where we approve as a council individual contracts, works well at our city, has been going fine. But the thing to understand is that underneath those rules are some big separation of powers questions. And without going into all of that, I'll just say this solution here with Section 4 means that we don't have to worry about any of that. This is an appropriate, there's got to be a better word than hygiene, but this is an appropriate way to do this that doesn't raise any questions about separation of powers, whereas the other rules we have, just they're just not as clean and they're subject to more question. Why not just do this simple thing that the administration agrees with and gets us through this without having to touch on anything else?
Well, the council can assure that we'll be proposing installing bidets in the restrooms in the future to improve our hygiene, so.
It's your fault.
All right. Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Sunwell.
So just to be clear, this Section 4 would not, if something's in the CIP, that wouldn't preclude that from coming to council then, right? As far as each contract?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, it would not.
All right.
Councilmember Sunwell.
There's actually no section you could put in here that would preclude that, because we can't not do that. So with that, I don't see people scream. I'd like to call the question on this particular amendment. I didn't
There's
even
a
finish.
motion and a second to call the question. So the question's been called. All those in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, question's been called. Now back to the original motion.
Which is?
Councilmember Mayhew, would you mind restating the motion?
To add in Section 4 to the list of funds, to add Fund 120, 313, and 316.
All right. So with that motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right. Councilmember Mayhew, before you move on to your last motion, I just wanted to introduce some more exciting numbers, 21 and 7. That's the final score of the Seahawks game. So Seahawks won 21-7.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
There's an important piece of information you
can't
have
watch
not,
it later.
that you have omitted. Which team had each one of those scores?
It's Seahawks 21.
Catherine did mention it. Now she's not going to go back and watch it, so there should have been a spoiler alert on that.
Oh, did I just spoil the game for someone? All right, sorry about
Recording
that.
it, but whatever.
Yeah. Councilmember Mayhew.
I move that in Section 4 to the list of funds, we add Fund 417 and strike the words non-utility from the section.
All right, at this
Second.
point, the motion's, okay. We have a motion and a second as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Sunwall.
I'm just pretending to lead music.
I wasn't sure what that was, but
Yeah,
okay.
I'm good.
Councilmember Ross, then
I guess
Councilmember
I
Mayhew, then
feel like it's
Councilmember.
covered elsewhere 'cause through the utility. I mean, we already have a CIP, it's been approved, and I just feel like this is kind of duplicating it.
Yeah. And just note, the administration is cautioning against this one, I believe. Is that the recommendation? Okay.
Well,
Or,
then so am
I mean, we're not going to fall on our swords over it, but it's just a caution. Councilor Lissay, and then Councilor Mayhew. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim, were you, well, I'm going to go round robin. Councilor Lissay.
By virtue of accepting this motion, then, if it's in the CIP, it goes through the normal process. I think that the discussion has been around is what part of that $8+ million is dollars that are not in the CIP or appropriated based upon either rates or some other process. Is it not having something to compare to? I don't know.
Again, we've gone through it in different variations with the council. This was approved in, September 2017.
Well, so I'll just state the CIP was approved in September of 2017. Last May, June, for example, we went through revenue bond update. The numbers incorporated in the 1920 revenue bond update could potentially differ from what was approved in the September 2017 CIP.
Well, let me ask it a different way then. Does the total reflect any potential expenditures that are not in the CIP?
Well, there's cash fund.
I mean,
There are cash-funded CIP projects. That was also presented in June and also in September of last year. So every year, and I think we mentioned this during the council presentations a few workshops ago, there's cash-funded transfers to the CIP each year from the rate revenues or from the rate funds.
But if you're if you're doing cash transfers, it's to fund a project.
Correct. Absolutely.
What
That's
I'm
the
asking
only
is
intention
if-
of that fund.
And I would assume that what I'm getting at is there anything in this number that would potentially be something that's not listed in the CIP?
No.
It's just a matter of and the number, I accept that the number may change. I accept that, we've got budgets and we've got actual allocations and we've got contracts and things go up and things go down. I get all that. I'm just supporting or not supporting the motion is based upon if there are potential expenditures that are not in this, already approved in a CIP. That's where.
There wouldn't be, and of course, we go to council for any amendment to that. I think it's more of a policy concern that we have. Again, we're under strict scrutiny, of course, with the SEC and the IRS regarding the proceeds of the bond funding. If there are any changes later, any delays, I think we'd be concerned about. We don't recommend the need for this on this particular item because, again, the CIP has already been approved by council. Those other items, as Councilmember Mayhew discussed, haven't been revisited since 2014. The utility CIP was reauthorized in September 2017. The rest of the CIP was not. So that's why we agree with his focus as far as the non-utility CIP. That definitely needs to be revisited as soon as possible because it hasn't even been updated in 4 years. But again, the utility CIP was updated and approved in September of 17. It was presented again to council for the bond issuance and that we ended up getting the financing and our credit rating on in June of 2018. And we have to disclose if there's any change to our rules and regulations and ordinances regarding anything that affects the bond proceeds, and in this case, the capital expenditures tied to the bond proceeds. So we have a concern that this is a step that would add additional scrutiny to the city that's unnecessary at this time.
Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Mayhew.
So this section 4 is tied to these fund numbers. Do we have any newly created fund numbers that have happened since in 2018?
We have introduced fund numbers to council in previous presentations. Again, Facilities Capital Fund, that's the one we set up with.
Right.
And that's the one we talked about where we set it up with the construction revenues from sales tax that accumulated over time.
So this would not incorporate any additional changes to fund creation, creating new fund numbers, right?
If we created new funds in the future, we'd have to come back to council for that as a separate item.
I believe the simple answer is no.
Okay.
Councilmember Mayhew?
So I would just encourage my fellow council members, passing a ordinance with appropriations is required by the state legislature. There's a reason they require this of us. They don't intend that we would just throw a number up there without knowing what's behind it and just say, yep, administration, you can spend that amount. I think that I've not heard why. I'm not proposing that we change the number. It appears that there's no disagreement about these numbers. So I have to say that us just saying, fine, make sure that that's the number and that it's on the CIP list. I just can't find any reasonable basis for objecting to that unless someone is intending to spend these amounts on something that isn't on the CIP list. If they're planning to spend it on the CIP list, why would they object to us saying you need to spend it on stuff on an approved CIP list? I don't get it. I think this objection must be based on something else, and I feel ever the more strongly that we need to do this, and that not doing it would be abdicating our responsibility to control the spending.
Yeah, I think we would respectfully disagree that the current language in the ordinance does not suggest that it's giving.
But Mayor, that was my point of view. I mean, I'm speaking to my fellow council members. I don't think that every time they've heard my point, they've heard your point. Is this someone else gets to talk last all the time?
Are you calling the question? Councilmember Sun?
I am. I'd like to call the question.
Second?
I have a motion and a second to call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Opposed? Motion is approved. Back to the main motion. Does everybody understand the motion, or would they like the motion restated? This is strictly about adding Fund 417 to the Section 4. And deleting the words non-utility. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
No?
That's a
Can I
problem.
just have a show of hands, or all those in favor? And all those opposed? Okay. I'm a tiebreaker. Okay, motion fails by virtue of a tie. All right, so any other items to deliberate or debate on or discuss? All right, so are we to, I'm assuming that that's concluding the council's deliberations on Agenda Bill 18143. If there's no objection, then I'll move to a vote. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, motion is approved 4-2. All right, with that, we'll move on to Agenda Bill 18150, ordinance amending sections 5.04.
Point of order. Can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. So at this time, we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene at 9:20 sharp. Any idea where Councilmember Mayhew went?
He's right there.
Is he in the lobby, or can someone tell him we need to come in?
That's a good one.
Yeah, we've been, but that one came up earlier. He shouldn't have shared it with me.
That's a good one. You got Councilmember Mayhem.
Oh.
All right, council meeting is back in session. With that, we'll move on to Agenda Bill 18150, ordinance amending sections 5.04.015 and 5.04.030 L of the Snoqualmie Municipal Code to adopt the revised model business license definition of engaging a business and to set a threshold below which no fee is required to obtain a business license. This was introduced on the 26th and is ready for action tonight. It was introduced on November 26th.
Just move.
Again, I need to.
Move to adopt ordinance number
1211.
amending sections 5.04.015 and 5.04.030.
I think it's L.
L of the Snoqualmie Municipal Code to adopt the revised model business license definition of engaging in business and set a threshold below which no fee is required to obtain a business license.
Second.
Motion is second as stated by Councilmember Mayhew, approving Agenda Bill 18150. Just for clarification, make sure we get the motion on the record appropriately. City Attorney, could you please look at that and tell me, I'm seeing what looks like a Roman numeral I up there on the reference 504.030.
Roman numerals are always lowercase.
Can't tell if
aren't
it's an L or an I. I just want to make sure.
I think Roman numerals are always.
It's an I. Okay, so for
I as in
clarification,
igloo.
just for the record, let's note it's an I. All right, Councilmember Sunwell.
I don't want to belabor this at all. I'm just curious why we elected to go based on number of employees versus revenue.
We need a second, I believe.
Oh, a second. I second.
Okay.
And then I
We have a motion
repeat
and a
what I just said.
Already seconded.
Oh,
Okay, thank
there we go. So is that a standard thing to go by number of employees versus revenue?
I think that it's not atypical in other cities. It's the existing regulatory scheme in the existing city code. So what we are doing with these changes, we're making only those that were mandated by the legislature in the model ordinance,
Okay.
which was to provide that threshold below which you could require someone to register, but they wouldn't have to pay a fee.
Okay.
And so we left those other provisions intact as far as determining what the fee would be as you went up the graduated scale.
Not a big deal, but I guess impact to community and the velocity of what's going on is probably better measured through revenue than employees, but
Right, and
it's fine.
council certainly could choose to do that. We had a time limit at the end of the year that we had to adopt this by, and council was busy with budget workshops, so we didn't want to come back and propose a wholesale reworking of the
Okay.
fee structure. But we could certainly bring that back next year if the council's interested.
Councilmember Lissay.
Just a question. So if you determine that you've got a number of employees, regardless of the number of employees, then if your gross income of business in the city is equal to or less than 2,000, and you don't have a place of business within the city, then you don't pay a fee. Is that accurate then? A business license. You don't pay the fee for the business license
license fee.
Business
Right.
license fee.
Correct.
So who's the arbiter of knowing whether a business is doing gross income of less than or equal to or less than $2,000?
It depends on reporting by the business to us and/or the State Department of Revenue. We
Councilor-
don't currently have and Robert can speak to this, but we don't currently have a formalized audit process in place for gross revenue.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So does this, I'm actually sort of not joking, does this require that someone with a lemonade stand get a business license, or that my daughter who babysits a lot get a business license?
Oh, she's selling
Over
expensive lemonade.
$2,000.
Oh, she does more than $2,000 a year, I promise you that. Babysitting. Not lemonade. We never did that. We were bad parents.
We have some exemptions in the ordinance that have to defer to the city attorney on specific exemptions in there.
Right, there's a long list here, and if it otherwise met the definition of engaging in business and wasn't subject to an exemption, then yes, a license would be required.
I'm just, where I'm going with this is I'm trying to avoid unintended consequences, because I'm sure there's a lot of young ladies in this town that make well over $2,000 a year babysitting.
And as I said, these provisions in the code are already in place.
Okay.
All this change does, as far as the threshold, is set a threshold below which you don't have to pay for the license. And again, we could bring this back for wholesale reworking or for consideration of additional exemptions beyond those that are set forth here. We didn't attempt to do that in this ordinance. We just were trying to meet the minimum mandated by the legislature to hit the deadline.
To Councilmember Sunwell's point, on our many list of things to do after the budget, reevaluating our entire business license ordinance is one of them. In a personal opinion, if babysitting is not exempt, probably should. That's something we should look at, definitely. So yes, it is on our list to look at to make sure that it's cleaned up if necessary at certain points. But if somebody's making $2,000 on a lemonade stand, it's a pretty good lemonade stand, probably.
I think it's Mike's Lemonade. I think that's the lemonade stand that does really well around town.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, council, I neglected at the beginning of this ordinance to open it to the public, so at this time I'll ask if there's any member of the public that would like to speak to this agenda bill. Julie? Julie, if you could come to the microphone, please.
Julie Lake, Box 1748, and I just realized it's actually a question that you probably can't answer, but it doesn't, so you're just setting the threshold, but you're not saying what the threshold is? And you don't know, my question is, so then if you don't know how much you're going to make, how do you know whether or not you're required to get the license? Just throwing it out there, thanks.
All right, thank you, Julie. Anybody else? All right, back to council for Councilor Summel.
So, not to answer a question directly, but I thought that was an interesting question. So, in this ordinance, is there? Because I think what we're talking about is I open up this little business thing. I mean, 2,000 is a pretty low threshold. I get it, but I'm opening up this business, and wow, I made $2,000. I was just expecting to make a few $100, and then so do I need to go back and get a license, or are we fine saying, hey, moving forward, nice job, you made $2,000 in 2020, you're going to need to get a business license. Is that contemplated here? I mean, the other thing here I know is the enforcement of this is virtually impossible, but I think there are people who want to abide by the law as much as they can. So I just, again, unintended consequences. I don't want to bury this because I like the principle of it, and so I don't want to delay it. I don't want to good enough to be perfect to be the enemy of good enough, or however that goes. But I mean, for now, this is probably good enough, but I think these are good questions to talk about as we maybe revisit this for the following year.
Councilor Ross and Councilor Shepherd.
And I see two. Sean's point, the license expires each year, so if you're doing really well this year, then when you go to get your license next year, then you need to report that, and your fee will be different.
Okay.
Councilor Shepherd.
So I don't know what enforcement looks like. If somebody doesn't conform to this, what happens?
Oh, again, enforcement.
20 to life.
Yeah, bad now. Enforcement is something that, frankly, the city has not had the resources or time in the past to do, but it's something that is on our list, and we are looking at either doing it in-house or contracting out to make sure that we're doing more enforcement of overall B&O revenue and also business license enforcement. So right now, it's pretty much somebody comes to us, then we look at it.
So I understand that we have a limitation on people who live in the floodplain not being able to have a business license. Is that right?
Never heard of such a thing.
No.
I thought there was, is Mark Hoffman here?
That would rule out all the businesses in the historic downtown.
Right.
Or Meadowbrook, yeah.
I'm talking about they can't be in their home. They can't have a business in their home.
I've never heard of that either.
I think that, I'm sorry, I thought that came up when we were doing the zoning review.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah, there's like 30 different things that were changed.
Yeah,
but
Mark.
But it was in the floodway in people's homes where you couldn't get a business
That was on
license.
that particular neighborhood in the floodway, yeah.
Right, and before Mr. Hoffman gets here, I'll take a stab at it. My recollection is because commercial structures in the floodway have to be either flood-proofed or flood-protected, and homes typically aren't, and those residential uses are grandfathered in for a certain time period in the floodway, but, Mark?
Councilmember Shepherd, if you could repeat your question for Mark, please.
So I'm just wondering how this is going to work with those homes, people who want to work out of their homes in the floodway. How is this going to, if we start to do some enforcement?
I don't know how to respond to that. That's a mixed mash of three different issues.
Right.
The initial issue is home occupations, which are generally allowed if you meet the standards. That's not specific to the floodway or not. The other difference is substantial development or loss, and then floodproofing and so forth. Residential and commercial are different. And then also minimal use of your property. If you can't build a home, you can do an alternative use. So I don't have an answer to that specific question. There's a variety of differences between residential and business in the floodway.
All right. Thanks.
Councilmember Jeans.
So I'm against this ordinance because it seems to me it lends itself to if one neighbor is mad at another neighbor, they can put the city on notices. I think their kid sells lemonade, and then that requires the city to do an investigation. And if the city chooses not to do an investigation, then that's arbitrary and capricious. I just think we ought to take a whole fresh look at this thing next year and consider what we ought to have as a statute.
Bob?
Go ahead. I'm looking.
Yeah, to Councilmember Jean's point, we're going to internally review it and make recommendations for the FNA and the council about, what is reasonable, because I think we definitely are on the same page as far as agreeing with
I'm
that
trying to
assessment.
look up the legislation right now, but my recollection is that if you don't adopt the mandatory minimum, which this ordinance is, by the deadline that you cannot enforce your B&O license or B&O tax requirements, and I'm not sure if it's both of those or only the licensing requirement at all. It's meant to be a mandatory minimum. We already have these license and reporting and tax requirements in place in the code. If there's an issue for lemonade stands or daycares, it exists today. It's not affected by this ordinance, except to the extent that either one of those businesses, if they had 0 to 2 under our current code, they would pay a license fee, whereas this will now allow them to get a license and not pay the fee at all. So to that extent, this ordinance benefits the smallest of businesses that are here. So I would encourage the council to proceed with this so we meet the state minimum requirement, and that if council has concerns, you ask us staff to bring it back, as Mr. Hammoud has suggested we will anyway.
Councilmember Jeans.
Call the question.
Second.
Motion and second to call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried, so back to the main motion. All those in favor of the Agenda Bill 18-150?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. All right, just a little backup on business here. I'm sorry, I'm still in ordinances. Agenda Bill 18-149, ordinance amending ordinance 1199, modifying the 2018 budget. This was introduced on November 26th and is ready for action tonight. A summary statement should already have been read in, so if you could just read the motion.
Move to adopt ordinance
1212.
amending ordinance number 1199, modifying the 2018 budget. May I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 18-149 as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Any I'm sorry, is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action?
I wasn't here for the introduction.
All right, seeing no one move forward, council, any discussion? Councilmember Lasay.
I would like to get just a brief explanation of this one. I was not here for the discussion on 1126. If we can just get a quick Cliff Notes, budget ordinance for dummies, something like that.
So basically, the intent of this agenda bill is to just kind of clean up, to make sure that we're spending under the authority given by council to staff, basically for the remainder of the year. If we happen not to underspend any fund from what was budgeted, we, for example, could get in trouble with the state auditor. So I've recognized within the budget section of the council report kind of all the changes that this amendment is intending to modify, and so please feel free to read through that section to give you some clarity.
I did read through it, I just didn't quite understand.
Councilmember Sumwell.
So if I'm reading this correctly, the appropriations were for 86.8 million, right?
Yes.
Which was 134,000 and change more than the 2018 budget that was approved?
Correct.
So are you saying that we're cutting 134 to make it to true it up, or what?
No. We're actually increasing the budget from ordinance 1199 by $134,000 that you see there. So the total funds appropriated for 2018 back in December of 2017 was 86.7 million. This increases it basically to 86.8 million just to close out this year, which is basically a 0.15% increase from that.
Councilmember May.
If I could just remind council members, at times during the year when we adopt particular agenda bills, in the budget section, staff will point out that something is above budget, and they'll typically tell us that an item might need a budget amendment in order to incorporate it, and they'll usually tell us why there's sufficient funding to cover that budget amendment that they're going to need. But rather than going through the process of amending the budget multiple times a year, especially in the second year of a biennium when they run into those, they just hold them all and kind of do it at once from a required legal approach of actually formally amending the budget, which is what they're doing here. But at each of these, we would have already known about that this was going to happen at the time that we approved spending that money and approved the contract or whatever the spending was. So this is just housekeeping. Oh, there's your word. Housekeeping.
Yes.
This is housekeeping.
Hygiene, housekeeping. Hygiene happens at home, but housekeeping is
Yes,
we do here.
Yes.
We often use housekeeping. We're fine with housekeeping. Or house cleaning, yeah.
It's a less spiky term.
As opposed to cleaning house.
With that, we won't have to install the bidets after all.
That's a spike of its own. All right, are we done?
Yes.
All right, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. With that, we're going to move on to reports. Parks and Public Works Committee Agenda Bill 18151, Agreement for Consultant Services Amendment with Number 1, Gray and Osborne Incorporated for Railroad Place, Newton and Delta Street Project Modifications.
This is the cul-de-sac agenda bill, right? All right. This contract amendment is for Gray and Osborne, Inc. to complete the existing design to compensate for unforeseen property issues which were encountered. This amendment also includes additional design work of water main and pavement replacement for the cul-de-sacs of Reining Place Southeast and Maple Avenue, which are in severe disrepair. The cost of these additional services is $58,610 and will increase the current agreement from $88,967 to $147,577. The difference between the originally approved budget and the proposed amended contract is $2,577. Funding for the excess will come from the $206,880 in contingency accounted for in council-approved utilities bond. This will leave a remaining contingency balance of $204,303. Move to approve agreement for consultant services amendment number 1 with Gray and Osborne for Railroad Place, Newton, and Delta Street project modifications, and authorize the mayor to sign.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 18151 as stated by Councilmember Sunwall. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Seeing no one, move forward. Councilmember Sunwall?
I think the reason we kept this off agenda was just to give you a little bit.
Off consent agenda.
Off consent, off consent was just to give you, whatever, 60 seconds just to explain kind of graphically what's going on, and I don't think anybody who's driven over that will disagree with this decision.
Was that a question?
No, that was a statement about what you're about to say.
Okay. Well, first, does anybody have a question about the project itself?
Can you give the 2-second spiel on it first? The two sentence spiel? What's it doing?
I don't know if it's 2 sentences, but essentially it's going to extend Newton all the way through to 384th. That's the project. The additional design work will be for Maple Avenue, the cul-de-sac on Maple Avenue and Reinig Place, which again are in really bad shape.
Two cul-de-sacs.
Can you open up the map? Would that be okay? Can you guys open the map real quick?
Yeah, I have Councilmember Ross and Councilmember Shepherd raising their hands. I don't know if you want to just add questions.
We have a picture of a map. If you can maybe touch on the areas of encroachment, what that means.
The map that's in the agenda.
Just go to Google
Just
Map.
map.
Not this one.
Yeah,
The agenda packet map, please.
I think Google Maps or agenda packet maps would be more helpful.
That one.
There we
We
go.
don't have a.
It's those two light blue circles are the additions, right?
Pointer.
Right there.
Oh,
Asking
is it on?
proceed.
Excellent. Okay. Red areas to
Bless you.
answer Councilmember Ross's first question. We do have some properties, specifically some plantings here, and there are some fences that have for a significantly long time have encroached on the city right away and will actually be affected by this project. So when it comes to go to add, and when it's done, we're going to put letters out to those particular residents about the need to either move a fence or.
Brian, if you could try to use the microphone as much as possible.
I'm sorry.
Make sure we're capturing you for the record.
Oh, sorry. Does that answer your question? I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this project because, again, I will be bringing it back when the design is done and we can get more into it.
But as Councilmember Sunwell was saying, the principal changes was the addition of the cul-de-sacs,
Yes.
correct? The light blue ovals, Reinig Place and Maple
Yeah,
Avenue.
these didn't show up very well on this picture, but right here, these two cul-de-sacs will be additional.
And that's all we're talking about with this agenda bill. Everything else has already been approved. We're just talking about the ones in blue, correct?
Not only that, but also because of this property encroachment issue, we have additional design that needed to be accounted for or that will need to be approved. And that is within that 58,610.
Okay.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So is this going to remove, or something going to happen to the St. Joseph parking lot, school parking lot for this?
Yes, yes, this is where right here, this Newton Street will go from Railroad Place, it'll come down, it'll go all the way through and go to 384. So this will become the essentially Newton extension.
What do you do with the parking, Brian?
The parking, we are, with the design that we have going on, we're actually going to be redesigning the parking. We have a significant right-of-way right there that I think I can't say what the numbers are for the exact parking stalls, but they will go down in number, but not by very much. But it doesn't totally disappear. There will be parking.
So this design isn't to try to assess what the arrangement's going to have to be with the property owner?
Oh, we've been in discussions with them.
Oh, you've already been doing
Yeah.
that? Okay. When did you start doing this design?
It started in 2016, but we've had, that's when the initial design started, and then we had the right-of-way issue with the property just north, and that took a while to get through. So we're just getting back into now that that's been resolved.
And what all are we going to put under that street there? Are we going to be putting sewer and
Just what it has on.
stormwater?
Yep, just what we have in the legend here. There's going to be storm, sanitary sewer and storm, I'm sorry, I already said storm.
I'm going to ask that we all
Sure.
try to stay sharply focused on the agenda bill before we're sort of just reopening and revisiting the entire
Right.
project all over again that we've already approved. If we could just be really focused on what is the change, what's before the council tonight, or at this time.
Thank you.
Okay, and which is primarily the, like you said, the right-of-way issue, the cul-de-sacs is
The
primary.
right-of-way and the
Okay.
2 cul-de-sacs.
And that's caused some additional design costs and
Right.
capital costs.
Exactly.
Okay, that's clear to everybody.
So how much are we actually approving additionally that we have not already approved?
58,610.
Okay, so where's the 2,000 come from?
Okay, the budget is 145,000,
Mhm.
and the total design will be 147,577. So the design is a little bit more than what the budget is. It's that 2,577 that's going to be coming out of the contingency that was already built into the bond.
So 2,000 coming out of contingency, but the total that we're approving right now is 58,000.
Correct.
56 of which is within the original budget, 2,000 of which is coming out of
Okay.
contingency.
Okay, so
Does that
we've
make
already,
sense?
yeah, that's what I wanted to hear.
Okay, okay, sorry.
Okay. There's no further discussion, council. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Any other items for Parks and Public Works Committee? Or any report?
No.
All right, Community Development Committee report.
No report.
Finance Administration Committee, we're going to jump back to the warrants here real quick. Approval of warrants as stated in the agenda packet. And we have a motion and a second, please.
Second.
Move
Someone's
to
gotta make the
approve
motion.
warrants as listed. Second.
Okay, I assume Councilmember Mayhew's made a motion to approve the warrants as stated in the agenda packet.
So did I use the wrong words? Move to
You didn't-
approve.
You just said warrants as listed.
Move to approve warrants as listed.
All right, thank you. And a second by Councilmember Sunwell. All right, is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? All right, council, any discussion? Councilmember Shepherd?
So I'm still looking at warrants. I still have questions that aren't being answered. And the question from this batch of warrants, which the council doesn't want to entertain these kinds of questions, is we still have quite a few checks that are refunding deposits from parks, deposits from, 8 years ago. And one of the questions I still have is, what is our system to know whether or not these things whether or not they've already been refunded? I saw a note on one of the documents saying they think they saw a check that was already written out to one of the people that were receiving a check for the refund.
Before the staff's addressing these questions, I guess I would defer to members of the Finance Administration Committee. I know they set up a protocol to address questions asked the council member who's not part of the auditing committee, so to speak, of the 3 council members there that review warrants in detail. If she had brought any questions to your attention to review, and if you had a chance to review this.
I don't believe that we had time at the last F&A committee to ask. Did we have time to ask? Remember, that was right before a budget meeting and we were quite hurried. I think we may, I don't recall us asking.
Okay. I mean, I'll defer to you if we could, I'm not sure that we're prepared to answer, not having been presented with which questions on what items in advance. I'm not sure that staff's going to be prepared to address some of these now. Robert, or the particular item that Councilmember Shepherd addressed, did you want?
I think you could say like.
And again, before we do that, are the members of the committee wanting us to go ahead and start addressing every question that?
I don't think so. I think if you bring your questions forward to the next F&A, we should be able to look at them then.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So I just want to reinforce that one of the criteria of whether or not they will consider having a question answered of staff is whether or not we received something. And this is the type of question that would not ever be answered because I can't tell whether or not something's been received or not.
You mean it's not a warrant, or what?
That was the agenda bill that the city council had passed on whether or not a council member could ask questions about warrants. And so this is the type of question that I have that I cannot get an answer to. Or ask, I guess, not even ask.
All right. Any further discussion, council? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, motion is carried. Moving on, under reports, Finance Administration Committee, Agenda Bill 18155, proposed 2019 classification rates and salary schedule for management and professional positions. Need someone to read the motion in a second.
Do we need to read the summary statement, Mayor?
This has been before us a couple of times. I believe the summary statement was read in already and it went back to committee, so probably you can just go right to the motion.
Move to approve the adoption of the proposed 2019 classification rates and salary schedule for management and professional positions.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 18155 as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Is there any member of the public that would like to speak to this item prior to action? Seeing no one move forward, any discussion, council? Councilmember Shepherd.
So I'm looking at some of the numbers for the salary survey, and I'm seeing that the positions for the top, let's see, city administrator is currently 7.7% over median. The city attorney has insufficient data to come up with what would be median, and the public works and parks director is 7.3% over median. So for those positions, I would like to make a motion that they do not get a 3% increase.
Okay, motion has been made to, on those positions as stated by Councilmember Shepherd, to not have those positions have a 3% increase. And if there's no second, then the motion will die for lack of a second. All right. Any other discussion, council? All right. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion is carried. All right, moving on to Agenda Bill 18156, City Lease of King Street Lot for Public Parking. Do have to read the summary statement this time.
Sigilla Winery, the company that purchased the King Street lot from the city on November 30th, 2018, is interested in leasing the lot to the city for public parking until such time the company commences construction of its new facility on the site. Move to approve a lease agreement and authorize the mayor to sign.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 18156 as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Wayne.
Mayor, would you like me to?
I know. Well, I think there's going to be probably extensive public comment, so.
I'd like to make a motion to move past 10.
Thank you. Do I have a motion and a second?
Second.
A motion and a second to approve to move go on past 10 o'clock. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. All right. Then Wayne, thank you. Go ahead.
Wayne Russell, 8438 Meadowbrook Way, Southeast. We found out today about this lease agreement, which I have printed out and I'm reading, and I really don't think it's a very good precedent to set by selling a city property and then leasing it to the people, which makes them a leaser, and they can use it according to the lease agreement for whatever purposes they want. We're basically using it for parking, paying the maintenance, and paying the insurance of the lot for if somebody has an accident while they're there. But what happens if Sigillo's decides to move all their equipment that they have sitting out on Meadowbrook down to their lot, put tents up, and so we're leasing a property and paying for insurance? And I don't know if Mr. Sturbank would have to answer that, but I don't know if they do something on that property, if there's an accident with them, is the city still going to be liable and our insurance have to cover it? And I think there's quite a few other citizens that are not happy about the lease agreement, and I'd hate to hurt the historic downtown businesses, but this parking thing, I know that's a key word a lot of people don't like hearing, but not just at council meetings. I've gone to a few committee and a couple of the other one, what's the other one that we use? Not the committees, but the planning commission, the commission meetings. And everybody brings up parking in historic Snoqualmie, sadly. So I think now is an opportune time to do a perfect study. Take down the parking signs, put up no parking signs, and rope the area off. I know it's going to hurt downtown businesses, but that's what they're going to be facing next year. And Sigelo's at any moment, a magic wand can wave and say, hey, we have funding, planning's gone through, we have permits, okay, we're building. Maybe they'll do it tomorrow. So this whole resolution might be bogus. So anyhow, thank you for your time, and I hope you vote no on it.
All right, thank you, Wayne. Anybody else? Yes. Anna?
Anna Sotelo, 7713 Center Boulevard, Southeast. My concern was just that the city attorney referred to a contract for NLS and for Girard down at the lagoon. And I'm just concerned why we're referring to an expired contract that I feel is under market value as well. So if we're going to be referring to that contract, I'd like them to show you that contract and we look into that contract, because I don't think that contract is I think that you should look at that contract. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Anna. Anybody else? Julie?
Julie Lake, box 1748. Yeah, I think the Girard contract expired in 2016. It's been problematic. So if you want to do the same kind of contract, you might reconsider. I just can't resist. On the tree lighting night, there were 125 cars parked on that parking lot. And although I know you don't think there's a problem with parking downtown, then why are we leasing it for parking? And it's even referred to as the parking lot. I mean, if parking isn't a problem, why lease it for parking? And if it was never meant to be a parking lot, why was it proposed to be paved in 2014? It's just so hypocritical. I just had to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Monica?
Monica Lowney. I'm also opposed to this, and the reason why is I reviewed the contract, the purchase agreement for this lot with the city, and I believe there was an exemption in it that gave Sigillo so much time to develop the land, otherwise they would have to sell it back to the property, which I was personally opposed to you selling it in the first place, and I believe you sold it for much less than it was worth. I also question the fact that, you know, let's be good neighbors, right? I mean, there's something in that real estate agreement that shows we're going to have Sigillo build a roadway that will be solely for the purpose and benefit of their business on the land, and the city is going to pay them back for it. Why is that? I believe you sold the property for $450,000, which to me is extremely under market value. In addition to that, you're planning to give a sizable money back to Sigillo after they build a road that will only be for the sole purposes of their business and their winery operation. Why do citizens have to pay for that? I'm a little confused. I think you need to put their feet to the fire. Either they're going to develop this site as planned, otherwise we're just going to open a can of worms to give the city the opportunity to give them more extensions, which they do not need. They need to either do it or not, or it should go back on the market to the highest bidder in a very public way, which this lot was not handled that way. And just as a property manager myself, I would not approve anything, council, without seeing the actual agreement that they want to provide with a potential lease. So my opinion is no. Again, I believe they should be developing this land very quickly, and if they don't have the money, they never should have purchased it in the first place. We've already given them so many extensions, and we haven't we haven't raised the actual purchase price of the property, which I believe is a mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Is there anybody else? All right, see no one else come forward. Council? Any deliberations? All right, if there's no questions or concerns, all those in favor?
Aye.
What?
Oh, I'm sorry, didn't see you.
Councilmember Lissay.
Thank you. I appreciate more than just a couple seconds of pausing there, because I was trying to structure how I wanted to ask a question, because the public comments brought up a...
You have the floor, Councilmember Lissay.
I understand that. The public comments brought up a question, and then it changed the way I was going to ask it. So the area that we are leasing back is the area that is a part of the property that was sold. There is additional land around the property that is right-of-way. city right-of-way. How are we dealing with the separation of that in the terms of this lease back agreement? Are we defining where the lot boundaries are so that there's parking in one place and parking in the right-of-way? Are we going to restrict that the right-of-way no longer gets parking? I'm just trying to understand I guess the operational procedures for establishing what is the King Street lot and the parking applicable to it, and what is city right-of-way, or I believe there's even some parking over the property boundaries into where correct me if I'm wrong, at Sandy Cove Park, where we've kind of exceeded into the boundary of the park slightly. So if I can get some clarification on that, it'd help understand.
Well, the lease provides for the entirety of the property that was sold to be leased back to the city. I don't know if the Parks and Public Works Director wants to speak to how it would be administered currently. As you know, if you've been out there, there's no demarcation on the ground where the right-of-way line is versus the property boundary, or even there's parking probably that occurs on part of the property that used to be an alley right-of-way between the bowling alley and the King Street lot that was vacated, and so a portion of that property actually belongs to the bowling alley. There's parking that occurs there on a day-to-day basis. So there is no demarcation on the ground at the moment. I don't know if there's plans to do that during the term of this lease or not. It was proposed by the Seals as a neighbor, as I think someone said, as a neighborly gesture, given what they had heard about public comments made. We weren't proposing to do, I don't think, much of anything different than what the current situation was out there on the ground prior to the closing of the sale.
As the leasee, we'd have control of the property for the parking use, and as the owner of the right-of-way, no demarcation or change in uses would be necessary, so essentially it would be status quo until such time that they were ready to proceed with building. They might come out and do some boring for soils testing as they prepare, but otherwise it's status quo. Councilmember Shepherd.
So is there a time frame where they have to start doing construction, or can they hold on to this land for 10 years and resell it at a profit?
There isn't a time frame specified, although there was a reservation of an option to repurchase to the city if their project is unable to proceed. So if they lost financing, if they said they weren't going ahead, the city has an option to repurchase. They can't just simply say we're not going forward and resell it to someone else.
Can we repurchase?
So if that was to happen, I mean, just to take the hypothetical, what it would mean is we'd continue to have a lease to use it in its current status quo fashion for parking, which a number of opponents to the project were desirous of. And the only fundamental difference was, rather than it being a publicly owned property from which we receive no taxes, we would receive property taxes, and the lease doesn't cost us anything. So it would actually be a net public benefit if it went on for 5 or 10 years in terms of the difference of if it was a scenario of parking lot owned by city versus parking lot owned by Seguelos.
So if we repurchased, is there a set price in our contract for repurchasing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
A set price that essentially would make us whole on the purchase, or the purchase price. Any other discussion, Council? Councilor
I was going to
Ross?
say, instead of having it just sit there empty, it's nice that we are able to lease it back and allow for parking until they start construction.
It's a good, like I said, neighborly gesture by the Seals to
Absolutely.
make sure the public continues to receive public benefit from use of that lot while they're preparing to do design work until such time that they begin to build. All right. If there's no further discussion or objection, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries. All right, with that, we move on to Public Safety Committee. Any report?
No.
All right, Committee of the Whole, any items? Well, we didn't approve any in the agenda amendments, so I'll just move on to staff reports, which are you have printed copies of reports, written reports at the beginning of every month, so at this time, we'll just ask quickly if there's any other questions from the staff or comments.
If I can make one observation.
Councilmember Lissay?
While I appreciate the staff reports and don't always get through all of them, every one has a slightly different format. and a slightly different way of communicating the information. As a suggestion, it might be good to try to structure that in a way that makes it a little easier to read, a little easier to follow, find the items throughout as we're going. Some may not have that opportunity, and I know IT has a unique format compared to the others, but it does create some difficulty in kind of reading through them, as
Okay.
they all do have significantly different ones. So if some could be standardized, that might help.
Right.
Just a suggestion.
Any other comments or questions from the staff? All right, with that, we'll move on to announcements. And real quickly, I just want to say I do enjoy that sometimes a few council members take time to join us at our annual Employee Appreciation Breakfast, which is coming up this Wednesday morning on December 12th at 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. at the Mountside Golf Course, at the restaurant there. So certainly encourage your welcome council members to attend that if you could. And maybe just give us a heads up, or to Jody, so we make sure there's enough seats for you. And then lastly, just wishing you all a happy holiday and prosperous new year. So with that, if there's no further business coming before the council, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to adjourn tonight's meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
It's a nice and